Chapter 1: The Torn Letter of Recommendation. The brilliant June sunshine poured like rich golden honey over the manicured gardens of Mayfair, casting a shimmering halo of light upon the proud climbing roses that bloomed in fierce competition. Under the meticulous, daily care of a dozen professional gardeners, the lush green lawns of Baroness Ravenscroft's estate resembled a soft emerald velvet carpet stretching beneath the feet of the assembled London ton. The garden tea party was at its height. Exquisite white lace parasols fluttered gently in the light afternoon breeze, which carried the sweet, intoxicating scent of blooming jasmine. Melodious violin music drifted from the eastern corner of the garden, blending with the refined, high-pitched laughter of the ladies as they sipped tea from wedge rose-patterned porcelain cups. Yet behind that splendid, tranquil, and beautiful facade, the afternoon tea party's atmosphere harbored the deep-seated hypocrisy and cruelty characteristic of the elite London high society. This very morning, the notorious scandal sheet, the Mayfair Gazette, had published a highly satirical, anonymous gossip column concerning impoverished noble houses that were desperately attempting to cling to empty titles to conceal their overwhelming debts. The rustling of expensive folding fans sounded incessantly across the lawn as the ladies huddled together in tight circles to whisper, gossiping animatedly and maliciously, about the identity of those who were about to be cast out of this brutal social game. To them, the sudden ruin of a distinguished family was merely a delightful distraction, a pleasant pastime to fill their tedious, empty summer days. Standing quietly beneath the shadow of an ancient gnarled oak tree, Adeline Gray felt like an unwelcome intruder in a false paradise. She wore a faded gray homespun dress, its hem neatly and carefully mended by her own hands but unable to hide its age in the wear of hard time. Her gloves were noticeably frayed at the fingertips, and her wide-brimmed straw bonnet was adorned only with a simple, faded ribbon, completely devoid of any sparkling ornaments or feathers. Adeline clutched her worn brown leather handbag tightly against her chest. Inside that bag lay her very last hope of survival, a letter of recommendation written by Dr. Archibald Vance, a highly respected scholar at Oxford and one of the few loyal old friends who had not turned their backs on her family after the storm of ruin had struck. Adeline's beloved father, Professor Arthur Gray, had once been a brilliant botanist and natural scientist respected throughout England for his profound research on flora and natural history. Yet, his life had ended in sudden tragedy 6 months ago due to a sudden apoplexy, leaving behind a mountain of debt engineered by unscrupulous, greedy speculators who had exploited his trust. The family's small, warm home in Bath, filled with cherished memories, was confiscated by the bailiffs, and all of her father's books, journals, and botanical specimens were auctioned off at a pittance to satisfy the cold creditors. From a young lady raised in comfort, intellect, and respect, Adeline was suddenly rendered homeless and penniless. She had not come to Mayfair today to seek a wealthy, aristocratic husband like the other young ladies of her age. She had come here to seek a position as a governess, an honest, respectable livelihood to support herself and discharge the debts of honor that her father had left unresolved. If only Baroness Ravenscroft would agree to look at Dr. Vance's letter, Adeline whispered to herself, her chest rising and falling beneath her thin gray dress. Just one chance to prove my abilities, and I shall protect my family's honor and stand upon my own feet. She took a deep, steadying breath to regain her composure and stepped out from the somber shade of the oak tree. Yet every step Adeline took through the brilliant, glittering crowd met with invisible walls of exclusion. The ladies swept past her with cold, blank gazes as though looking at an invisible wisp of smoke or a common servant. A few even drew back slightly, pulling their expensive satin skirts aside, as if fearing that the poverty evident in her attire might taint their elegance. "Look there," Lady Alicia whispered behind her pale blue lace fan, nudging her companion. "Is that not the daughter of Arthur Gray? The one who shocked the academic world by dying in a mountain of debt and disgrace?" "Indeed it is her," a nearby lady replied, her tone dripping with condescension and mockery. "I cannot comprehend what Baroness Ravenscroft was thinking to allow such a creature through the estate gates. It is an absolute insult to this afternoon's gathering." Adeline heard every cruel, whispered word. They cut like tiny, cold blades into her self-respect, yet she did not betray the slightest hint of weakness. She kept her spine perfectly straight, her chin slightly raised, and her gaze directed forward. The knowledge she had accumulated from discussions with her father, and the self-esteem of a scholar's daughter, did not permit her to bow her head before those who only knew how to value a person by titles and wealth. Suddenly, the murmurs of the crowd parted as a woman emerged from the main hall of the mansion. Lady Catherine Howard walked with the haughty grace of one who stood at the peak of power. She wore a rich emerald taffeta gown, her wide-brimmed hat adorned with ostrich feathers that shook proudly with each step. Catherine's features were extremely sharp, but they exuded an immense coldness and cruelty. As the sister-in-law of the powerful Duke of Windermere, she had always considered herself the ultimate arbiter of London high society, particularly since her husband had passed away, and she was plotting to place her son in line to inherit the Howard estate under the terms of the entail. Catherine stopped directly in front of Adeline, her gaze, sharp as a falcon's, swept over the young woman's faded gray dress and frayed gloves. A mocking sneer appeared on the lady's arrogant face. "Oh, look whom we have here," Catherine said, her voice quiet yet carrying clearly in the garden stillness. All eyes and conversations around them immediately turned to watch. "Miss Adeline Gray, I had thought you had hidden yourself away in some dark corner of the countryside to escape your creditors, rather than bringing this ragged appearance to offend the eyes of the Mayfair nobility." Adeline maintained proper etiquette, curtsying with measured poise, her voice calm and steady. "Good day, Lady Catherine. I have come here to seek a position as a governess for the young ladies of the Ravenscroft household. I believe my knowledge of history, languages, and music is entirely suited to their education." Catherine laughed aloud, a harsh, malicious sound that cut Adeline short. "A governess for a distinguished family? That is the most preposterous notion I have ever heard. Miss Gray, do you truly believe that someone rising from the ashes of bankruptcy has the right to instruct the children of the highborn? I possess a letter of recommendation from Dr. Archibald Vance of Oxford," Adeline replied resolutely. She opened her handbag, carefully withdrew the neatly folded letter, and offered it with both hands. "Dr. Vance has attested to my moral character and academic competence." This letter, without letting Adeline finish her sentence, Catherine violently snatched the letter from her hand. Her movement was violent, yet she maintained the careless air of a superior. She held the letter high, looking at the respected scholar's signature with disdain. "Dr. Vance?" Catherine raised her voice, ensuring the surrounding crowd could hear every venomous word. "What does a senile old scholar at Oxford know of the standards of London high society? That he should dare write a recommendation for the daughter of an academic fraud and debtor? Lady Catherine, pray watch your words." Adeline's voice hardened, her eyes flashing with anger at the insult to her father. "My father, Professor Arthur Gray, dedicated his entire life to the study of botany and natural history. His debts were the result of deceitful speculators. He defrauded no one. My father's honor is not yours to defile, honor." Catherine shrieked, her face twisting at Adeline's resistance. "A man who died in disgrace, fleeing his creditors to the point of exhaustion, dares speak of honor? All of London knows that Arthur Gray falsified his botanical reports to secure loans. He was a common academic fraud. And you, his daughter, wish to bring that soiled name to pollute noble households. Do you intend to teach aristocratic children how to lie and run from debts just as your father did?" The whispers around them suddenly rose like a hostile wave. The nearby aristocrats covered their mouths to hide mocking sneers, nodding in agreement with Catherine's cruel accusations. They looked at Adeline with derisive eyes, waiting for the poor young woman's collapse. Solitude enveloped Adeline. Among those hundreds of splendidly dressed people, not a single soul extended a hand to help, and no one spoke up to defend the honor of the deceased scholar. They wished only to witness a scene of humiliation to satisfy their own malicious amusement. Catherine looked at the letter in her hand, then glanced at Adeline triumphantly. "Your letter of recommendation," she said slowly, enunciating each word, "is fit only for the rubbish heap." With that, to Adeline's shock, Catherine violently tore the letter. The sound of tearing paper was sharp, crisp, and utterly ruthless. She tore it in half, then into quarters, and continued to shred it into dozens of tiny fragments. With a gesture of complete disdain, Catherine opened her palm, letting the scraps scatter in the evening breeze, falling across the damp, dew-laden green lawn of the Mayfair garden. "Begun from this place, Miss Gray," Catherine said coldly, brushing her lace gloves as if she had touched something filthy. "The daughter of a debtor has no right to breathe the same air as us, let alone enter a noble household. Leave, before I summon the servants to eject you." Adeline stood rooted to the spot, staring at the torn paper scattered beneath her worn leather shoes. Her heart felt squeezed by an iron hand. That letter had been her sole key to survival, a symbol of Dr. Vance's trust, and the only remaining spiritual heritage that allowed her to take pride in her father. Now it had been reduced to meaningless scraps on the ground. The corners of Adeline's eyes stung, but she resolutely refused to let a single tear fall. She knew well that the surrounding aristocrats were holding their breath, waiting for her to weep and crumble completely so they could turn her into the jest of subsequent soirees. Adeline Gray would never grant them that satisfaction. She clenched her fists beneath her faded gray sleeves, regaining a deep and steady breath. She held her head high, her sharp emerald eyes locking onto Catherine's arrogant face with utter calm and supreme pride. Lady Catherine, Adeline spoke, her voice steady, clear, and sharp enough to freeze the smirk on Catherine's lips. "You may tear this letter, but you cannot tear the knowledge from my mind, nor the honor of my father. The true nobility of an aristocrat lies in how they treat those less fortunate than themselves, when they have nothing. Today I see you draped in London's most expensive silks, yet your soul is poorer and more wretched than that of a common street beggar." Catherine's face hardened, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and fury. She had never encountered an impoverished girl who dared look her directly in the eye and deliver such sharp words before a crowd. Catherine opened her mouth to summon the servants, but Adeline was swifter. Adeline slowly knelt. She did not kneel in the posture of a sinner begging for forgiveness. She knelt upon the grass with absolute pride and elegance, keeping her spine straight and her head held high. Her frayed gloved hands began to gather the scraps of paper scattered on the lawn. Mocking laughter and jeering remarks arose once more from the crowd. "Look at her, she is actually picking up the scraps." Indeed, the pitiful pride of a penniless wretch. Adeline completely ignored those vulgar noises. She focused on gathering each torn fragment, cradling them as though picking up the broken pieces of her family's honor. Her fingertips touched the damp grass, the chill of the London evening seeping into her flesh, yet inside her burned a fire more resilient than ever. This splendid Mayfair high society was, in truth, merely a theater of hypocrisy, where the wealthy used their status to cover the decay within their souls. They thought that tearing a piece of paper could destroy her, but they were mistaken. When a person has touched the bottom of misery, they have nothing left to fear. She would live, she would rise, and she would make those who laughed at her today bow before her in the future. Under the brilliant Mayfair sun, the image of the solitary girl in the gray dress, kneeling amidst a pack of haughty aristocratic wolves, was etched forever into the memory of that afternoon. She gathered the last scrap, clutching it tightly in her hand with pride. The evening wind continued to sweep across the lawns of Ravenscroft Manor, carrying the sweet scent of roses and the profound coldness of human hearts. Adeline Gray's battle had only just begun, and she knew she would never falter. Lady Mary's lavender London in the middle of May was a splendid yet completely soulless oil painting, draped in the light, silvery spring mist and pale gold sunbeams that illuminated the haughty, grand streets of Mayfair. Behind the high, intricately wrought iron gates of the private garden, the outdoor tea party of the high-born aristocracy proceeded in all its hollow, glittering bustle. Laughter, thin, brittle, and cold as crystal keys, echoed incessantly throughout the afternoon air. The rustling of expensive, colorful silk gowns, the fluttering of delicate lace fans that concealed judgmental, gossiping countenances, and the sharp clinking of silver spoons against royal Worcester, rose-patterned porcelain cups formed the familiar, repetitive background melody of the London season. Yet at the very edge of the lush, rolling green lawn, far from the laughter and the music, the warmth of the spring sunshine seemed to vanish entirely, replaced by a profound, biting coldness that had absolutely nothing to do with the weather of the day. Adeline Gray knelt upon the damp, dew-laden ground, her slender shoulders striving with all her might to remain straight, upright, and dignified beneath her thin, faded gray homespun cloak. On the grass around her knees, the shredded, white pieces of her letter of recommendation lay scattered like withered petals after a violent, destructive summer storm. It was the final, precious handwriting of her beloved late father, the revered scholar Arthur Gray, the only instrument in her possession that could have secured her a proper position as a governess to support herself in this cruel world and settle the immense debts of honor that weighed upon her shoulders. Now those precious fragments had been torn to shreds by the cruel black, lace-gloved hand of Lady Catherine Howard. A creature without a single farthing of honor or breeding, Lady Catherine's sharp voice rang out with chilling, public contempt, intentionally raising her tone to draw the immediate attention of the surrounding guests. She stood there proudly and haughtily, her black lace fan swaying gently before her chest, her arrogant countenance clear with a smug, mocking satisfaction as she witnessed Adeline's public humiliation. The House of Grey has perished forever in the mire of a failed dreamer's debts. What right do you possibly think you have to step into this polite high society, let alone educate the children of distinguished, noble families of the realm? Adeline did not look up immediately. She closed her eyes tightly, taking a deep, steadying breath to suppress the hot anger, humiliation and shame welling up in her chest. She told herself she must not weep before these wolves. Tears before an enemy were an absolute surrender, and she resolutely and proudly refused to bow her head to their judgment. Using her slender, bare hands, she meticulously, carefully, and quietly gathered every scrap of paper from the damp grass. Dry twigs and sharp thorns pricked her flesh, leaving small bloodied scratches on her delicate, pale fingers, yet Adeline seemed completely oblivious to the physical pain. Such discomfort was nothing compared to the fiery resolve burning within her soul. "I am gathering my father's honor, my lady," Adeline said, her voice quiet, steady but clear, quietly cutting through the crowd's rising mockery. She stood up slowly, her back perfectly straight, her proud gray eyes looking directly and fearlessly into Lady Catherine's cold, angry face. And a person's true honor does not reside in torn pieces of paper, but in how they face the cruelty of those who call themselves noble. Lady Catherine hesitated, her handsome face briefly showing a flash of anger at Adeline's fortitude. She was about to utter further, more biting insults when she suddenly stopped, noticing a movement along the stone path not far away. At that moment, a tall, imposing figure began to make his way toward them. It was Benedict Howard, the Duke of Windermere, who was approaching the scene of confrontation. The Duke, widely known throughout the land as the formidable Rock of the Lake District, wore a dark black wool riding coat, his exceptionally tall frame and chiseled, rugged features appearing to the onlookers as though they were carved from the very granite of the Cumbria Mountains. His cold, ash-gray eyes looked straight ahead, completely devoid of any friendly expression, radiating a natural, formidable authority that caused the gathered aristocrats around him to part automatically and silently to clear his path. Benedict detested the city of London, loathed the vanity and empty gossip of Mayfair, and hated even more having to bring his fragile young daughter to such noisy, hypocritical gatherings. But today, because of family obligations, he had no choice. Beside him, little Lady Mary, a delicate 6-year-old girl with silken blonde hair, clung tightly to her father's large fingers. Mary walked timidly and hesitantly, her large round eyes filled with absolute fear and defensiveness before the staring crowd of high society guests. To this poor child, who was suffering from selective mutism, following the sudden tragic loss of her beloved mother, the noise and confusion of Mayfair was nothing short of a vivid, terrifying nightmare. She panted continuously as she walked, her small shoulders trembling visibly beneath her fine blue velvet cloak. Benedict could easily feel his daughter's mounting panic through the tiny, shaking hand in his firm clasp. He knit his dark brows, his heart aching for her pain, yet feeling entirely powerless to soothe it. He had already hired and dismissed 5 previous governesses in London, because they had foolishly attempted to impose rigid discipline, shouted or used harsh, impatient measures to force Mary to speak, only succeeding in wounding the child's fragile psyche further. Suddenly, a loud, high-pitched laugh erupted from a nearby group of drinking aristocrats, followed immediately by the sharp metallic crash of a fine porcelain teacup shattering upon the stone pavement just a few feet away. That sudden sharp noise struck Mary's highly sensitive nerves like a physical blow. The young girl startled violently, falling into a state of sheer, uncontrolled panic. In a sudden, desperate moment of terror, Mary wrenched her hand from Benedict's strong grasp and bolted blindly across the lawn, desperate to flee the overwhelming noise that surrounded her on all sides. "Mary," Benedict called out in clear alarm. He immediately strode after her across the lawn, his habitually cold, unreadable features now betraying a deep, intense anxiety. He knew all too well that when Mary was highly agitated in this manner, she could scream hysterically and easily harm herself if approached improperly or aggressively by strangers. Mary ran aimlessly and blindly, hot tears beginning to stream down her chubby, pale cheeks. She tripped on the long hem of her gown and nearly fell to the earth, directly beside the spot where Adeline Gray was quietly kneeling on the grass. Adeline looked up as she heard the hurried, frantic footsteps and the shallow, rapid breathing of the child. Before her stood a tiny, beautiful girl, her face pale with fear, her eyes pleading for help. Rather than springing up quickly or showing any alarm that might frighten her, Adeline remained quietly in her kneeling position to avoid appearing threatening to the child. She smiled softly at her, a warm, gentle, and infinitely patient smile that carried no expectations. "It is all right, little one," Adeline murmured in a low voice, her tone as soothing as a gentle breeze blowing across a warm summer field. She did not make any sudden attempt to touch Mary, nor did she press her with questions. She merely extended her slender, scratched hand toward her, palm upturned in a silent, welcoming gesture. Mary froze in her tracks. She looked intently at Adeline. In the clear gray eyes of this impoverished young woman, Mary found no judgment, no coercion, and none of the heavy, suffocating expectations of the high-born nobility. There was only an infinite quiet and comforting peace. The surrounding din of the tea party seemed to fade into nothingness, replaced by a deep, wordless connection between their two lonely souls. Mary's high defenses melted away in an instant. She did not scream in panic, nor did she run away. Instead, Mary approached Adeline slowly and trustingly. With her tiny soft fingers, she gently touched the small bleeding scratches on Adeline's hand, as if wishing to soothe her pain. Then from her small coat pocket, Mary withdrew a dry, pale purple lavender sprig, the single item she always kept close to her as a protective amulet. Mary carefully and deliberately placed the flower into Adeline's palm, her large, round eyes gazing at her with complete, unreserved trust. Benedict approached the spot and stopped, utterly stunned, a few paces away. The scene before his eyes shook the Duke, who was widely renowned for his steely, unemotional nature. His beloved daughter, the child who had always rejected every stranger, who fell into severe fits of panic whenever anyone tried to draw near, was standing peacefully and calmly beside Adeline Gray. The gentleness and trust Mary showed this strange girl was something Benedict had not witnessed from his daughter in the past 2 long years. He stared in disbelief at the dry lavender in Adeline's palm. It was the flower Mary had plucked from her late mother's garden, the single object she never allowed anyone to touch, not even him, yet now she had freely and trustingly given it to a complete stranger. Benedict observed Adeline closely. She remained kneeling on the grass, making no attempt to curry favor with his daughter, nor appearing flustered by the sudden presence of the powerful Duke. Her calm dignity in the face of public adversity, and the unfeigned gentleness she showed Mary kindled a deep respect within Benedict's chest. This was no ordinary governess seeking social advancement or his wealth. This was the only person who held the key to unlock Mary's closed heart. Those who claimed to be the finest and most experienced governesses in London only brought Mary fear and distress. Benedict thought to himself, his gaze darkening as he recalled the failures of the past. They used loud words to crush her silence, but this girl, she understands. Benedict took a step forward, his tall silhouette enveloping both Adeline and Mary, creating a solid shield against the curious, staring eyes of the crowd around them. He bent down, gently and tenderly lifting Mary into his arms, yet his sharp ash-gray eyes remained fixed upon Adeline. "Thank you for your gentleness with my daughter, Miss Gray," Benedict said, his voice deep, low yet carrying clearly in the quiet air. Adeline stood up slowly, curtsying in accordance with proper protocol. "It is my honor, Your Grace. Lady Mary is a most special and gentle child." At that exact moment, Lady Catherine Howard walked over. Recognizing Benedict, her expression instantly shifted from disdain to feigned, sweet warmth. She approached them quickly, her expensive silk dress rustling loudly against the lawn. "Oh, my dear Benedict," Lady Catherine exclaimed, her voice sweet yet filled with warnings and venom. "You should not permit Mary to stand near this girl. She is Adeline Gray, the daughter of the bankrupt debtor who tarnished the nobility's name in Bath. She possesses no letter of recommendation, nor has she any business standing here in this garden, let alone approaching our dear Lady Mary." Benedict turned slowly, his gaze cold as the snows of the Lake District as he looked at Lady Catherine. His sister-in-law's boundless arrogance and cruelty had always disgusted him, particularly when she intentionally trampled upon those less fortunate to elevate herself. "A person's worth is not yours to decide, Lady Catherine," Benedict spoke, his voice carrying the absolute, unyielding authority of a duke of the realm, silencing Catherine instantly. "And I trust that my daughter Mary is capable of reading a human soul far better than all of us combined." Benedict turned back to Adeline. He saw her standing there, her spine perfectly straight, her calm gaze accepting his sudden protection, without a single trace of pleading or fear. That quiet, noble pride only served to strengthen his resolve. "Miss Gray," Benedict spoke clearly and loudly, his voice resounding across the Mayfair garden, capturing the attention of the entire ton. "I am seeking a private governess for Lady Mary at Windermere Manor. I have dismissed all previous applicants for their foolishness and impatience. I offer this position to you." A collective gasp of sheer astonishment rippled through the surrounding crowd of aristocrats. Lady Catherine's mouth fell open in shock, her face turning pale with anger and embarrassment. She had only just shredded Adeline's recommendation and declared that she would find no employment in London, yet the most powerful Duke had immediately offered her a position directly before the entire ton. "Benedict, have you lost your senses?" Lady Catherine protested in outrage, her voice trembling. "She has no letter of recommendation. Her family is completely bankrupt. My daughter's trust is recommendation enough." Benedict cut Catherine off coldly and decisively, leaving her no room to argue. "As for remuneration, Miss Grey's salary shall be 120 guineas a year, along with a special allowance to resolve any of her personal difficulties in London. The contract shall be drawn up by the Howard family solicitor this very day. 120 guineas a year. It was an astronomical generous sum, 3 times the salary of an ordinary governess in London, and more than sufficient for Adeline to gradually pay off her father's debts and lead an independent, dignified life of her own." Adeline looked at the dry lavender in her hand, then into the eyes of little Mary, who was resting her head peacefully against her father's shoulder. She realized that this was not merely a means of survival, but her destiny. This child needed her, and she needed this child to heal the wounds within her own heart. "I am honored to accept your offer, Your Grace," Adeline replied, her voice firm, clear, and steady. Benedict nodded in satisfaction. He glanced coldly at Lady Catherine, who stood rooted in place, humiliated and completely powerless before the Duke's absolute authority. "We shall await you at Windermere Manor next week, Miss Grey," Benedict said, and taking Mary by the hand, he turned and strode away. He left behind a wave of astonished whispers and the utter defeat of Lady Catherine. Adeline stood there for a moment, clutching the lavender tightly in her hand, her head held high as she walked out of the Mayfair garden, prepared for the challenging journey that lay ahead. Chapter 3. The Rainy Manor of the Lake District. The long winding road leading to the wild and majestic Lake District seemed to stretch infinitely across the undulating hills that rose and fell like waves beneath the gray, heavy sky of the north. The old mail coach, its black paint peeling and flaking in many places from years of neglect, rattled and groaned along the rough, waterlogged stone roads. The constant grinding of the iron wheels on the wet gravel, and the steady rhythmic clop-clop of the horses' hooves created a monotonous, dreary sound that filled the carriage. Through the small glass pane of the door, blurred by long, weeping streaks of rainwater that resembled tears, Adeline Grey gazed pensively and quietly at the passing landscape. Only a few short days ago, she had stood in the very heart of bustling, opulent, and hostile London, enduring the contemptuous stares and venomous, public insults of Lady Catherine Howard at Mayfair. That arrogant, cruel woman had publicly shredded her letter of recommendation, branding her a common fraud who was entirely unfit to educate the noble class, simply because her late father had died in overwhelming debt. The memory of the mocking, high society laughter of Mayfair's elite lingered in Adeline's mind like an unhealed, painful wound, but she had chosen to walk away from that garden with her head held high. She did not weep, nor did she beg for mercy. Instead, she had quietly and proudly gathered the torn fragments of paper from the wet grass. It was this silent, remarkable pride that had caught the attention of Benedict Howard, the Duke of Windermere, who had witnessed her ordeal, and made a sudden decision that would transform her life forever. Now the opulent yet hypocritical world of London was left far behind, giving way to a wild, cold landscape shrouded in persistent heavy rains. The Cumbrian hills emerged majestically beneath a dense white mist that poured down from the steep limestone peaks like a silent waterfall. The green of the pastures here was not the vibrant, sunny hue of the south, but a dark, deep emerald, waterlogged and melancholic. Mist drifted lazily over the silent, dark lake, clinging to the gaunt, ancient pines like eerie silk banners from a long-forgotten, ancient world. Adeline sighed softly, drawing her ash-gray wool cloak much tighter around her slender, cold shoulders. The cold, damp air, seeping through the carriage door's crevices, caressed her flesh with the biting chill of the northern rainy season. She opened her worn, brown leather handbag, her delicate fingers lightly touching the dry lavender sprig that little Lady Mary had given her in Mayfair. The small, brittle flower still held a faint, pure, and incredibly gentle fragrance. It was her only link, a tiny ray of hope and light to sustain her spirit as she entered the place known throughout the region as the Manor of Silence. As the carriage rounded a narrow, sharp bend sheltered by ancient, wind-breaking pine trees, Windermere Manor suddenly loomed before Adeline. It was a colossal, imposing and majestic structure, built entirely of massive gray granite blocks in the previous century. The mansion possessed the melancholic, dark beauty of classic Gothic architecture, with soaring stone spires reaching toward the gray sky and tall, arched frosted glass windows resembling soulless cold eyes observing a stranger. Patches of dark green moss clung to the ancient stone walls, soaked in rainwater, creating a cold, distant and uninviting appearance. The manor stood solitary in the deep valley, its back pressed against the steep cliffs of the wild hills, while its front faced the vast gray expanse of Lake Windermere, its waters rippling under the endless rain. The old, rattling mail carriage finally came to a complete halt before the grand stone entrance of the manor. The driver, looking nervous and uneasy, quickly lowered Adeline's single wooden chest to the wet ground and hastily departed the estate as though fleeing some invisible, oppressive, and dark presence. Adeline stepped down onto the muddy gravel, raising her black silk parasol that bore a few small, neat mends along its outer edge. She paused for a quiet moment, looking up at the wide stone steps that led into the dark main hall of the mansion. The entire place was terrifyingly quiet and absolute still. No birds sang in the nearby gardens, no busy servants hurried about preparing to receive a new guest. There was only the steady, monotonous patter of rain, falling upon the pine needles and the low, mournful whistle of the cold wind through the ancient stone crevices. The heavy oak door, heavily banded with hand-forged black iron studs, slowly and silently swung inward. The person who stood there to greet her was not the noble Duke himself, but Mrs. Halloway, the stern older housekeeper whose gray hair was bound in a tight, neat bun, wearing a dark black wool gown without a single crease or ornament. Standing behind her in the dim shadows of the foyer were two young housemaids who regarded Adeline with curious, sharp gazes that quickly shifted to clear vigilance, suspicion, and a cold distance. "Welcome to Windermere Manor, Miss Gray," Mrs. Halloway spoke, her voice dry, highly formal, and cold as the weather of the Lake District. She offered a minimal brief curtsy, just enough to avoid appearing outright rude to a guest. "I am the housekeeper, Mrs. Halloway. Your wooden chest shall be taken to your quarters later. For now, His Grace awaits you in his private study. Pray follow me immediately." "Thank you, Mrs. Halloway." Adeline smiled gently, keeping her voice polite, calm, and steady. She stepped inside the foyer, and immediately a heavy, melancholic sensation of sadness enveloped her. The air in the vast main hall was cold, damp, and smelled strongly of old stone and damp pine. The massive crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling were completely unlit, with only a few candles flickering along the dark corridors. The oil portraits of the Howard ancestors hanging along the dark oak walls seemed tinted with the sorrow of time. Adeline could clearly feel the specter of grief that still reigned in this house since the tragic death of the late Duchess 2 years ago. There were no fresh flowers in the antique porcelain vases, no melodies of music, only a suffocating, heavy, and absolute silence. They traversed long, winding, and quiet corridors, Adeline's footsteps echoing rhythmically on the highly polished mahogany floor. The few servants she encountered along the way bowed hastily and retreated into the shadows, their eyes filled with skepticism and doubt. Adeline knew all too well what they were thinking. They were silently wagering on how many days this poor, bankrupt governess from London would survive before being dismissed by the Duke, just as the 5 before her had been. Their doubt and suspicion did not discourage her. On the contrary, it only strengthened her resolve to maintain her dignity, prove her worth, and succeed in this home. Mrs. Halloway finally stopped before a heavy wooden door carved with the Howard family crest at the very end of the east corridor. She knocked thrice clearly and firmly. "Come in," a deep, commanding yet cold voice called from within the room. Mrs. Halloway opened the door, bowing to gesture Adeline inside. "Miss Gray has arrived, Your Grace." Adeline crossed the threshold, and the heavy door immediately closed behind her. The Duke's study was vast, warm, and filled with books. Dark oak bookshelves rising to the ceiling held thousands of leather-bound volumes. The rich scents of leather, ink, and burning pine drifted through the air, creating a warmer, more comforting atmosphere than the cold hall outside. At the far end of the room, before a smoldering hearth, Benedict Howard stood with his back to her, his gaze directed out the window toward the misty, rain-swept lake. He wore a formal black waistcoat and a finely tailored dark blue tailcoat, accentuating his tall, solid, and imposing stature. Benedict turned slowly as he heard her footsteps. The dim light from the window reflected off his sharp, solemn, and handsome face. His ash-gray eyes were deep and cold as Lake Windermere under the rain, staring directly at Adeline as if to peer into her very soul. "Miss Gray," Benedict spoke, his deep, commanding voice echoing in the quiet room. "I trust the long journey from London was not excessively fatiguing." "Thank you for your concern, Your Grace," Adeline replied, offering a proper, graceful curtsy, her spine remaining proudly straight. "The scenery of the Lake District is indeed majestic and beautiful, though the rain is somewhat more persistent than I had imagined." Benedict walked closer to his large mahogany desk. He did not sit but leaned slightly against the edge, crossing his arms over his chest, his eyes never leaving her face. "I did not invite you here to admire the scenery, Miss Gray. I trust you have been fully informed of your duties at Windermere by my sister-in-law's display. Yes, Your Grace. I have come to care for and educate Lady Mary. A shadow of deep sorrow and pain flickered across Benedict's face at the mention of his daughter's name, but he quickly concealed it behind his habitual icy, unyielding exterior. Indeed, but there are strict rules at this manor that you must observe. And I want you to hear them directly from my lips, rather than through another's rendering. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The Duke's powerful, imposing presence made the surrounding air feel heavier. My daughter Mary has not spoken a word since the accident that took her mother 2 years ago. Her previous governesses all believed they could employ rigid discipline, forcing her to speak or read to prove their own competence. They viewed her silence as defiance that required punishment, and every one of them was dismissed from this estate immediately. Benedict paused, his voice becoming exceedingly cold and severe, carrying an open, sharp warning. I forbid you to coerce Mary into speaking in any manner. You are not to scold her, use any form of physical or emotional permission or punishment, and absolutely must not display impatience in her presence. Your task is simply to be with her, guiding her in basic studies should she wish to learn. If I find you violating this rule even once, you shall be dismissed immediately and expelled from Windermere Manor before sunset. Do you understand this clearly, Miss Grey? Faced with the Duke's cold, serious threat, Adeline did not display the slightest fear or hesitation. She looked directly into his gray eyes, her gaze clear, resolute, and filled with understanding. I understand perfectly, Your Grace, Adeline said, her voice gentle yet clear, each word carrying the weight of quiet confidence. Language is not a whip with which we can lash a child to force out sound. Lady Mary's silence is not stubbornness or rebellion, but a protective shield she has erected following a profound trauma. That shield can only lower when she feels secure. It cannot be shattered by force or the coercion of textbooks. She smiled softly, a gentle expression that nevertheless held the sharp intelligence of a woman educated by a scholar. If you desire a governess who merely inflicts dry punishments and demands submission, then perhaps you have chosen the wrong person. But if you wish for someone to accompany Lady Mary in her silence, helping her rediscover the world through patience, I believe I am capable. Benedict stared at her in silence. For a long, quiet moment, the coldness on his face fractured with surprise at her sharp, insightful response. The quiet pride and dignity of this poor girl was vastly different from those who constantly sought to please him with flattery or cowered before his high rank. He realized she did not look at him with self-interest, but with genuine empathy for the pain of a father trying to protect his troubled child. Very well, Benedict cleared his throat slightly, turning away to conceal the mild stir in his chest. I shall witness how you put your words into practice, Miss Grey. Miss Mary's schoolroom is on the second floor of the West Wing. You may begin your first session this morning. The housekeeper shall show you the way. I bid you good day, Your Grace. Adeline curtsied gracefully and turned to leave, leaving Benedict standing alone in his vast study, his gaze following her slender form through the doorway, until it closed completely behind her. The following morning, Adeline entered the classroom in the west wing of the mansion. The room was spacious yet chilly, with large windows overlooking the misty hills and the quiet expanse of Lake Windermere under a light, powdery drizzle. On the dark oak shelves sat thick, leather-bound textbooks, a dusty globe, and writing implements arranged neatly but untouched for a long time. Lady Mary was already seated there waiting. Wearing a simple light blue dress, she huddled in a large armchair in the corner of the classroom, close to the window. Her tiny hands were clasped tightly together, cradling a worn rag doll with frayed sleeves. As Adeline entered, Mary startled slightly, her round gray eyes, so like her father's, watching Adeline with caution and fear. She shrank back into the corner of the chair, as if wishing to make herself invisible to the stranger. Adeline did not rush forward. She stood by the door, smiling gently at Mary, and offering a soft greeting in her most soothing voice. Good morning, Lady Mary. Today's weather is most suitable for us to begin a quiet new day. Mary did not reply in any way. Her round eyes merely followed Adeline's movements warily, her tiny arms tightening around the rag doll. Rather than approaching Mary or demanding she sit at the school desk as previous governesses had done, Adeline walked to the large wooden table in the center of the room. She did not touch the thick textbooks lined upon the table. Instead, she set down her handbag, opened it, and withdrew her own supplies: smooth sheets of vellum paper, a few drawing charcoal sticks, a small watercolor tray, and fine brushes. Adeline pulled out a chair and sat down. She completely ignored Mary's presence in the most delicate manner, placing no pressure on the child. Adjusting herself into a comfortable posture, she dipped a brush into a glass of water and began placing her first strokes upon the pristine white paper. The classroom fell into absolute silence. There was only the steady patter of rain outside the window, the soft whistle of the wind through the sash, and the quiet scratching of charcoal on the vellum. Adeline was drawing a wild sprig from the Lake District, the heather and lush ferns she had observed along her journey. She used delicate charcoal strokes to shape the curved, dew-laden leaves, then meticulously embellished them with soft watercolors. She was entirely focused on her work, her delicate face displaying peace and absorption. The patience and tranquility radiating from Adeline was like a warm breeze, gradually dispelling the tense, chilly atmosphere of the room. From her corner, Mary watched Adeline closely. She found this new governess very strange. Miss Gray did not open a single textbook, did not demand that she stand up to greet her, and did not speak to force her to pronounce words or answer silly questions. Miss Gray simply sat there, quietly painting, as if she were a part of the room's silence. The curiosity of a 6-year-old child gradually awoke, overcoming her initial fear and caution. Mary shifted in her armchair. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the wild sprig taking shape on Adeline's paper. Seeing that Adeline did not react and continued painting, Mary quietly slipped down from the chair. Her small bare feet walked soundlessly across the thick wool carpet. Adeline could clearly feel the child's movement, but she pretended not to notice. She continued her soft brush strokes, adding a few raindrops glistening on the purple heather petals. Mary approached closer step by step, extremely slowly. She stopped about 3 paces from the table, tilting her head to view the painting. Adeline gently shifted the paper slightly to give Mary a better angle, yet she did not look up at the girl, nor did she speak a word. She respected the child's safe space and her freedom of choice. Seeing no threatening movement from Adeline, Mary took another step. Now, she stood directly beside the table, her eyes shining with wonder at the beauty of the heather on the paper. Adeline gently set down her brush. She placed another blank sheet of paper beside Mary, then set a small charcoal stick upon it. Still she said nothing. She merely turned to look at Mary with a gentle gaze, offering a soft nod as a silent invitation. Mary looked at the blank paper, then at the charcoal stick. Her tiny hands trembled slightly. She looked up at Adeline inquiringly, as if seeking confirmation that she was truly permitted to do this. Adeline only smiled warmly, her eyes filled with patience and trust. Finally, Mary timidly reached out, picking up the charcoal stick. She bent over the paper, hesitated for a moment, and placed her first stroke. It was a formless scribble, yet it was the first sound to breach the fortress of silence between them. Adeline did not offer loud or hollow praise. She simply took up her own charcoal and sketched a few green leaves beside Mary's line, merging their efforts into a single shared drawing. Mary looked at the drawing, then up at Adeline. For the first time in 2 long years, a spark of warmth and joy appeared in the girl's sad gray eyes. The distance between 2 lonely souls, between the resilient poor governess and the silent child of the Lake District, had begun to bridge, quietly and wonderfully, beneath the endless reign of Windermere Manor. Chapter 4. The Duke's Silent Melody. The fall of night at the ancient estate of Windermere Manor ever brought with it a biting, piercing chill that swept down relentlessly from the wild, rugged ridges and desolate crags of northern Cumbria. As the tall wax candles positioned along the immense, shadow-filled great gallery began to slowly gutter and fail, leaving behind only small, flickering, and dim points of light that cast long, dancing silhouettes upon the dark oil portraits of the ancient Howard ancestors, the massive stone mansion plunged into a fearsome, heavy, and absolute silence. It was by no means the peaceful, comforting, and warm quiet of a normal family home, settling down to rest after a long, busy day of life, but rather the oppressive, suffocating, and terrifying silence of an ancient sandstone tomb that had been sealed for centuries from the light of the sun. Within the dark, quiet confines of her spacious, high-ceilinged bedchamber situated in the east wing of the manor, Adeline Gray stood silently by the tall, leaded glass window, gazing out into the pitch-black, rain-swept courtyard below. The cold, relentless wind whistled and shrieked through the ancient stone masonry of the manor, creating long, solitary wails that sounded to her eyes and ears like the crying of lost souls in the dark. Yet the sorrowful sound that troubled her sensitive heart most of all was not the howling wind outside, but rather the soft, stifled, and agonizing noises of weeping that were quietly emanating from the adjacent chamber. It was without a doubt the private chamber of little Lady Mary. 3 long, silent nights had now passed since Adeline had first arrived at Windermere Manor to assume her official duties as Lady Mary's private governess. And on all 3 of those nights, without exception, she had heard the young girl's faint, muffled, and heart-wrenching weeping, echoing through the thick stone wall that separated their chambers. Mary was frequently and cruelly tormented by terrifying nightmares of the accident. The poor motherless child would start awake in the middle of the night, clutching her frayed rag doll tightly to her chest, huddling in the furthest corner of her large, dark bed with her round eyes filled with absolute, raw terror. Whenever Adeline had attempted to quietly enter the room to comfort her, Mary would instantly shrink back in fear, rejecting all approach as if any hand reaching for her in the dark brought only further hurt and pain. Mary's pain was far too deep, and the high defensive walls surrounding the poor child's traumatized soul were too strongly fortified for mere spoken words to penetrate. Adeline understood this truth completely. She knew that to a fragile soul whose trust in the world had been violently extinguished, empty words of reassurance were but meaningless, mocking noise. She required a completely different language of communication, a language that needed no spoken words, yet possessed the power to reach the deepest, most hidden corners of the child's wounded heart. Adeline sighed softly in the quiet room, her dark, warm wool wrap draped loosely over her slender shoulders, its long fringe swaying gently with her movements. Holding a heavy brass candlestick to light her path through the darkness, she stepped quietly out of her chamber. Her destination tonight was the grand music room, which was situated on the cold ground floor of the ancient mansion. The grand music room of Windermere Manor was a vast, cold space, with towering marble pillars and a high vaulted ceiling adorned with classical, elegant frescoes that had long since faded into obscurity. In the very center of the room, lying silent and neglected beneath a heavy, dusty gray canvas cover, was the famous Broadwood grand pianoforte. The beautiful instrument had once been the pride and joy of the late Duchess, but now it resembled a forgotten, dusty ruin in a desert. Adeline set the brass candle upon a nearby mahogany table, its small flame casting long shadows across the floor. She approached the quiet instrument and gently, carefully pulled back the heavy gray canvas cover. A thin layer of gray dust rose into the air, glittering like tiny stars in the warm candlelight. For 2 long years, ever since the terrible tragedy that had stolen the laughter and joy from this manor, the piano had never once been touched. Benedict had ordered this room locked to all, attempting to bury all memories of music and the warmth of his past life. But Adeline would not allow this freezing coldness to reign unchallenged. She sat down quietly upon the worn velvet-upholstered piano bench. Her delicate fingers brushed lightly and reverently over the cool ivory keys. Adeline closed her eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath, to feel the very breath of music that still lingered within the grain of the antique instrument's wood. She pressed the first key gently. A deep, warm, and resonant note vibrated through the air, instantly breaking the quiet, heavy stillness of Windermere Manor. At first her fingers were somewhat stiff and hesitant on the keys. But quickly the melody grew softer, warmer, and far more fluid. Adeline chose Mozart's Turkish March, but she played it with a slow, far gentler, and more rhythmic tempo than the original version, effectively transforming the lively march into a sweet, soothing lullaby. Next, she smoothly transitioned into the beautiful first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The sorrowful, gentle notes fell like cool night dew upon the surface of a still lake, weaving through the thick stone walls and echoing softly along the dark, empty corridors of the mansion. The beautiful piano music was like a warm, soothing stream flowing through the cold stone corridors, gradually awakening the silent, dark corners of Windermere Manor. On the floor above in her dark, cold bedchamber, Mary sat with her knees drawn tightly to her chest, her eyes still wet with hot tears from her recent nightmare. Suddenly, her ears twitched, a distant, gentle, and incredibly familiar sound drifted up to her. Mary raised her head and listened intently. It had been so long since she had heard such sweet sounds in this house. It was not terrifying like the howling wind outside, nor heavy and stern like her father's footsteps in the corridor. It was gentle and warm like her mother's embrace in days past. As if drawn by an invisible, powerful magic, Mary slowly slipped from her bed. Her small, bare feet touched the cold wood of the floorboards, but she did not care. Mary quietly opened her chamber door, stepped out into the dark, silent corridor, and followed the guiding, beautiful music. Adeline continued to play on the ground floor, her heart poured into the keys. The flickering, warm candlelight cast her shadow upon the wall behind her, creating a scene that was both ethereal and deeply comforting. Through the dark reflection on the polished mahogany casing of the piano, Adeline suddenly spotted a small, fragile figure standing hesitantly just outside the music room door. It was little Mary. The young girl wore a simple white nightgown, her soft golden curls cascading over her small shoulders, her round eyes observing Adeline with a mixture of intense curiosity and deep caution. Adeline did not stop playing. She knew well that if she ceased playing abruptly or turned to welcome her too eagerly, this frightened, delicate fledgling would instantly fly away into the dark. She merely smiled, directing her gentle, warm gaze toward the ivory keys, and continued to play. The Moonlight Sonata melody transitioned smoothly into a brighter, warmer Mozart piece, acting like a silent, whispered summons. "Come hither, little one." Mary stood perfectly still at the door for a long time. The soothing music was like an invisible, gentle hand stroking away the fear within the child's heart. Step by step, extremely slowly, Mary stepped into the music room. Her bare feet glided over the thick, warm Persian carpet. Finally, she stopped directly beside Adeline. Adeline shifted slightly to one side, yielding a portion of the worn, velvet-covered bench to the young girl. She did not look directly at Mary, nor did she speak a single word. She simply allowed her fingers to continue to dance across the keys. Mary hesitated for a brief moment, then timidly climbed onto the bench, sitting quietly beside Adeline. She stared in wonder at Adeline's slender fingers gliding so skillfully over the keys. Up close, as music even more magical and grand, enveloping Mary's senses and completely dispelling the coldness of the night's chill. Adeline glanced softly and warmly at Mary. She slowed the tempo of the piece, playing soft, low bass notes with her left hand while raising her right hand toward the child. She upturned her palm, offering a silent, gentle invitation. Mary looked at Adeline's open hand, then at the ivory keys before her. After a brief silent hesitation, she timidly placed her small, slightly trembling hand upon Adeline's warm palm. Adeline's hand was so incredibly warm that comforting warmth immediately transferred through Mary's cold skin, prompting the child to release a soft, long sigh of relief. Adeline gently enveloped Mary's tiny fingers in her own, then slowly and carefully guided her hand to rest upon the keys. "Let your fingers loosen, little Mary," Adeline whispered, her voice warm, soft, and soothing as the very piece she was playing. "Do not fear, my darling, this piano will not hurt you, it only wishes to tell you a story." Adeline gently pressed a key using Mary's finger. A clear, bell-like note rang out. Mary startled slightly at the sound, but then her eyes lit up with a sparkle of joy that had not appeared in a long time. Adeline continued to guide Mary in pressing several more keys, creating a brief, simple, yet exceedingly sweet melody. For the first time in 2 long dark years, a fleeting, beautiful smile graced Mary's face. No longer timid or fearful, she leaned close to Adeline. Her head rested peacefully against the young governess's shoulder, seeking the comfort and warmth that had been denied her for so long. Adeline felt the small, precious weight on her shoulder, her heart swelling with deep emotion. She continued to play the piano with one hand, while her other arm gently wrapped around Mary's slender shoulder, patting her in rhythm with the music. Meanwhile, in the dark corridor leading to the music room, a tall, imposing figure stood motionless in the shadows. It was Benedict. He had been awakened in his chamber by sounds he had thought gone forever from his life. When the very first notes had played, he believed it to be a mere illusion conjured by his own longing and regret. But the music was too real, too vivid to be ignored. It drew him out of his cold, lonely study and led his slow steps to the gallery of the grand music room. Benedict leaned against a cold marble pillar in the corridor, concealed in the deep darkness so that no one could see him. It had been 2 long years since Windermere Manor had last heard the sound of music. 2 years since the tragic passing of his late wife, who had taken all the joy, laughter, and music of this house into eternity with her. Since then, he had detested music. He hated anything that reminded him of the warm, beautiful life he once had, for the stark contrast between the past and the present only served to emphasize the emptiness and coldness of his soul. But now, standing silently in the darkness and listening to the gentle, flowing melodies of Mozart and Beethoven, Benedict felt none of his usual anger or resentment. His chest tightened with a strange emotion, and an unfamiliar, warm sensation slowly seeped through the thick ice enveloping his heart. He peered quietly through the slightly ajar door of the grand music room. In the flickering, soft candlelight, he saw Adeline seated gracefully at the grand piano. Her delicate face exuded an extraordinary elegance and gentleness. And beside her, Mary, his poor daughter, whom he had not known how to reach, rested her head against Adeline's shoulder in perfect peace. The trust and serenity on Mary's face was something he had not seen in a very long time. The cold Duke's heart suddenly twinged with a sharp pain. The coldness and rigidity he had proudly and defensively worn as a shield against pain now showed its first cracks. He looked at Adeline, the woman he had once assumed would be merely an ordinary hireling. She was nothing like the insipid, haughty young ladies of Mayfair. She carried within her a quiet strength, a wondrous, deep empathy capable of warming the darkest, coldest corners of Windermere. Benedict stood there in the shadows for a long time, quietly listening to the music played upon his late wife's piano, and watching his daughter gradually fall into a peaceful, deep sleep against Adeline's shoulder. He did not enter the room to break this sacred moment. He merely stood there in silence, feeling the thick ice in his heart slowly melt, bit by bit, beneath the gentle warm piano keys of the night. Chapter 5: A Calling Card from London. The drizzling, persistent rain characteristic of the Lake District seemed never to relent upon the grey slate roofs of the grand Windermere Manor. Since the sharp autumn winds had swept in, the vast sky above the undulating green hills was perpetually and heavily shrouded in a thick, gloomy fog. The dense mist swallowed the ancient stone pine ridges, turning the vast lake in the distance into a massive, opaque grey mirror that could not reflect even the feeblest ray of sunlight. Freezing rain continuously beat against the leaded stained-glass windows of the grand study situated on the mansion's second floor, producing a monotonous, dreary tapping sound that filled the room. Within the study, however, the atmosphere bore a completely different, warm, and inviting tone. The room was warm, filled with the rich scent of aged mahogany from the towering bookshelves that reached the ceiling, the beeswax polish on the oak floor, the leather of thousands of gold-embossed books, and the gentle fragrance of pine smoke rising from the white marble hearth. Benedict Howard, the Duke of Windermere, stood motionless beside the grand windowsill. One hand was slipped into the pocket of his finely tailored dark navy wool coat, while the other slowly turned the gold signet ring engraved with the spreading falcon of the House of Howard. His chiseled features, sharp as the granite cliffs of northern England, appeared even more solemn and cold than the harsh weather outside. Benedict's ash-gray eyes stared intently into the white, heavy sheet of rain. Yet his mind was turned toward the gentle sounds drifting from the drawing-room across the corridor. 3 weeks had passed since he had brought Adeline Gray to Windermere Manor, as Lady Mary's private governess. 3 weeks, a brief span of time compared to the centuries of the Howard dynasty, yet sufficient to bring a miraculous, wonderful transformation to the mansion that had been buried in sorrowful silence for 2 years. Benedict recalled the previous governesses he had employed, stern widowed ladies or ambitious young women recommended by the most reputable agencies in London. All of them had tried to use iron discipline, dry lectures, or even harsh coercion to force Mary to speak. The only results had been panicked screams, tears of terror, and his daughter's absolute withdrawal. But Adeline was entirely different. She applied no pressure. She approached Mary with meticulous botanical sketches, with dried lavender sprigs, and with the warm piano melodies that resonated whenever dusk fell. Benedict himself had stood quietly in the dark corner of the corridor many times, peering through the slightly open door to observe the two. Adeline sat at the grand piano, her slender hands, though marked with a few small scars from past hardships, gliding gracefully over the keys, creating clear tones like a spring brook. Beside her, Mary sat cross-legged on the wool carpet, her round eyes watching each moving key intently, showing no fear or melancholy. Adeline's gentle presence was like a warm breeze blowing through the frozen house. A gentle yet firm knock from the loyal butler, Harrison, quietly severed the Duke's thoughts. Harrison entered the warm study, with the proper decorum and respect of a servant who had served the Howard family faithfully for 2 generations. Upon his white-gloved hands he bore a small, polished silver presentation tray. On the tray lay an exquisite cream calling card with a thin gold border, and a thick, heavy paper envelope sealed with royal blue wax. "Your Grace," Harrison bowed low, his voice warm and respectful. "A messenger has just arrived from London by express mail. He brought this calling card and a confidential letter addressed directly to you. The sender is Lady Catherine Howard." Benedict knit his brows. The name Catherine was like an inkstain clouding the peaceful atmosphere of his study. He turned, walked to his desk, and reached for the card. On the expensive vellum paper, the words Lady Catherine Howard were engraved with elegant embossing, accompanied by a strong scent of lavender perfume and artificial fragrance that Benedict always found stifling and false. He flipped the card over, where Catherine had written in sharp, thin, and somewhat hurried script, "To my dear brother-in-law, we must discuss the honor of the House of Howard before it is too late." "Where is the messenger?" Benedict asked, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "He departed immediately after delivering the letter to catch the return coach to London, Your Grace," Harrison replied. "He stated that Lady Catherine requested this letter be placed directly into your hands without intermediaries." "Very well, you may go." Harrison bowed and quietly withdrew, closing the heavy oak door and returning the study to absolute silence. Benedict sat in the large leather chair behind his oak desk. Using a silver paper knife shaped like a small sword, he sliced through the wax seal. The letter inside was written on 3 thin pages of parchment, covered in a flowing hand but filled with his sister-in-law's envy and malice. Benedict began to read, his ash-gray eyes scanning the lines quickly, and as the words unfolded, his features hardened, his lips tightening into a cold, straight line. My dear Benedict, I trust that the damp weather of the Lake District has not affected your health or that of your poor daughter. However, I write not to inquire after such trivial matters. I write to warn you of a danger residing in the very heart of Windermere Manor 1, who is tarnishing the name of the House of Howard, whom you through blindness or neglect have taken into your home. Whom have you hired as a governess for Lady Mary? Adeline Gray. The name sounds noble, but the truth behind it is exceedingly filthy. She is no respectable governess of clean breeding. She is the daughter of Arthur Gray, the foolish scholar who died suddenly 6 months ago of apoplexy from the pressure of his debts, leaving behind a mountain of liabilities and a completely ruined reputation. Adeline Gray herself is in truth a cowardly debtor. She has fled the pursuit of her creditors in Mayfair and run to the wild Lake District to hide under the guise of a governess. For a widowed duke to harbor the daughter of a debtor, a penniless wretch, beneath his roof is an insult to London high society. Imagine what the ton will say when they discover that the instructress of a Howard daughter is a social outcast. The reputation of the Howard family, which your father and you worked so hard to build, will be utterly destroyed. I warn you, Benedict, if you do not immediately dismiss Adeline Gray and cast her out of Windermere Manor, I shall not stand idly by and watch our family name be soiled. I am prepared to publish the full truth of her origins and her father's unpaid debts in the London scandal sheets, including the Morning Post. The entire fashionable world will know that you are harboring a debtor. Furthermore, I reiterate my previous proposal. Mary must be sent to a specialized asylum in Switzerland to treat her mutism once and for all. Keeping her at the estate with a nameless governess only delays her recovery and proves you are incompetent to care for your own daughter. Make the correct decision before your honor is reduced to ashes. Your sister-in-law who cares for your house, Catherine Howard. Benedict set the letter down. His face did not distort with anger, but his ash-gray eyes had completely turned to 2 blocks of ice. Devoid of warmth, a terrifying silence enveloped the room, broken only by the crackle of pine logs in the hearth. Benedict stood up, holding Catherine's letter in his hand. He did not need to ponder or hesitate for a single second. He knew Catherine's true motive all too well: family honor. That was merely a hypocritical excuse she used to mask her insatiable greed. Catherine's husband, Benedict's late older brother, had squandered most of his personal fortune before his death, leaving her and her son with a modest allowance from the Howard estate. According to the terms of the entail, if Mary were declared legally incompetent due to insanity, and if Benedict died without male issue, the entire Windermere estate and the dukedom would pass to Catherine's son. She wanted to send Mary to an asylum. She wanted to dismiss Adeline Gray because she realized Adeline was gradually healing Mary. She feared Mary would recover. She feared her son's inheritance would be jeopardized. Benedict stepped before the fireplace. The orange flame cast sharp lights and shadows across his chiseled face. He dropped Catherine's letter directly into the red-hot embers. The edges of the parchment curled rapidly, blackening before bursting into flames. Benedict stood watching the fire consume every threatening line and every insult directed at Adeline. Within seconds, the letter was reduced to gray ash, drawn up the chimney by the draft. A cheap scheme, Benedict muttered, his voice cold as alpine snow. He returned to his desk, pulling the cord to summon the servants. A moment later, Harrison appeared at the door. Your orders, your grace. Harrison, prepare a carriage with 2 horses. Dispatch someone to the town of Kendal immediately. I require the presence of Mr. Sterling at Windermere Manor before nightfall. Inform him that this is urgent family business. Harrison was slightly surprised by this urgent command, as Mr. Sterling usually only visited the estate during quarterly audits. However, the old butler's loyalty and professionalism permitted no curiosity. I shall arrange it immediately, sir. After the butler departed, Benedict stood leaning against the edge of the oak table. His arms crossed, he turned his eyes toward the corridor. He knew that at this moment, Adeline was likely in Mary's small library downstairs, guiding her in drawing autumn maple leaves or telling her stories of fairy tale flowers. Benedict wondered if Adeline knew what awaited her if her father's debts were exposed. How much bitterness had that girl with the steady eyes and elegant poise endured since her father's death? When she was humiliated at the tea party in Mayfair, she had not bowed her head to weep. She had gathered the shredded pieces of her recommendation with a quiet pride that no wealthy lady in London could mimic. She was a woman of immense self-respect. If she knew Catherine was using these debts to threaten him, Adeline would surely pack her bags and leave Windermere immediately to avoid bringing trouble to the House of Howard. She would rather suffer poverty and face aggressive creditors than become another's burden or stain. And that was precisely what Benedict would never permit. He could not let her go, not only because Mary needed her, but because, for some reason deep within his heart, a frozen corner that had been closed for 2 years was gradually warming whenever he saw her slender figure walking through the somber corridors of Windermere. Darkness fell rapidly over the Lake District. The rain outside turned into a minor gale, the cold wind howling fiercely through the stone pines that surrounded the ancient mansion. Precisely at 6 in the evening, the distant sound of carriage wheels grinding on the wet gravel path echoed outside the main hall. A moment later, Harrison escorted the family solicitor, Silas Sterling, into the Duke's warm study. Mr. Sterling was a gentleman in his 60s, slender yet upright, dressed in a simple, neat black frock coat. Behind his round spectacles, his eyes gleamed with the sharp intelligence of a legal man who had spent his entire life resolving complex legal and financial matters for the most powerful, aristocratic families in England. He bowed formally and respectfully to Benedict. "Good evening, Duke of Windermere. I came as soon as I received your message. I trust nothing of a grave nature has befallen the estate." Benedict stepped forward, shaking the old solicitor's hand, then gestured to the large leather armchair opposite the blazing fireplace. "Good evening, Sterling. Thank you for coming despite the foul weather. Do sit, Harrison. Pour Mr. Sterling a glass of sherry to warm him." After Harrison poured the rich wine and quietly withdrew, Mr. Sterling took a small, appreciative sip of the sherry, feeling the warmth spread through his cold bones, then set the glass down on a small mahogany table beside him. He looked directly at Benedict, waiting for him to speak. "Sterling," Benedict began, his voice calm, low, yet carrying an unyielding, powerful authority. "I have summoned you here tonight on a personal matter, but one that requires absolute, strict confidentiality, so confidential that not a single servant in this mansion must know a single detail of it." Sterling nodded, his face turning more serious. "You know my code of secrecy, my lord. For 30 years the secrets of the Howard family have been buried safely beneath my pen." "You may trust me completely." "Very well," Benedict said, pacing before the fireplace. "I want you to investigate and gather information on all the debts of the late father of Miss Adeline Gray, Mary's current governess." Mr. Sterling paused slightly, his glass held mid-air, his silver eyebrows arched in clear surprise. He understood London society well, and was, of course, fully aware of the public scandal surrounding the late scholar Gray's family. "Miss Gray? You mean the daughter of Arthur Gray, the late botanist?" "Indeed," Benedict replied briefly. "My lord, if I recall correctly, Arthur Gray was a brilliant scholar but a terrible investor. He borrowed extensively across London to fund his hopeless botanical expeditions to South America and non-profitable book publishing projects. When he died suddenly 6 months ago under the pressure of his debts, the remaining liabilities were vast. His creditors range from private banks in the City of London to notorious moneylenders in the East End slums. The total debt likely amounts to several £1,000s. It is an enormous financial burden for any individual, let alone a young lady with no inheritance." "I am well aware of that," Benedict said, looking directly at the solicitor. "And that is why I want you to settle all of those debts." Sterling's eyes widened in astonishment. He set his glass down, leaning forward slightly. "Settle them, you mean? Pay them off in full?" "Yes, I want you to quietly track down every single creditor holding Arthur Gray's promissory notes. Be they major banks or backstreet moneylenders. Use name of your law firm or an anonymous trust to purchase or settle all of those debts. Pay them every shilling they demand, including accumulated interest, in exchange for retrieving the original notes and legal receipts of settlement." "But your grace," Sterling hesitated, his voice filled with the concern of a man charged with protecting a family's fortune. "This is no small sum. It could amount to £3,000 or £4,000. Such an amount is enough to purchase a modest country estate. Why should you assume a debt entirely unrelated to the House of Howard for the sake of a private governess?" Benedict turned slowly to look at Sterling, his gaze cold and sharp as a polished steel blade. "Sterling, Miss Gray is currently employed under my roof. She is the one responsible for the education of my daughter, the sole heir of Windermere at present. I will not permit any external factor, whether creditors or vile threats from London, to disrupt her work or place pressure on Mary's mind." Furthermore, Benedict paused, his voice dropping but remaining absolute. "I wish to protect her honor and her freedom. Mr. Sterling looked deeply into the young Duke's eyes. He had served Benedict's father for decades and had seen Benedict grow up from a young boy. After the tragic death of the Duchess 2 years ago, Benedict had closed his heart entirely, becoming a cold, distant, and pragmatic man. He had never once displayed concern or compassion for anyone other than his daughter, Mary, yet now he was prepared to expend a vast fortune simply to free a poor, bankrupt governess from the burden of debt. The old solicitor, with his rich experience of life, immediately understood that this relationship was no longer merely that of master and governess. However, he also understood Benedict's proud character. He would never admit his true feelings at present. "I understand," Sterling said softly. "But there is a legal and moral complication, sir. Miss Gray is a woman of high self-respect. If she discovers you have stepped in to clear her debts, she might feel insulted or view it as charity, which would destroy your working relationship. That is why this matter must remain strictly confidential." Benedict emphasized, his tone stern. "She must not know a single detail of my intervention. You must disguise this transaction under another form. Tell the creditors that an anonymous foreign patron of the arts, who admired her father's research, has decided to settle the debts to preserve Arthur Gray's reputation. Or create a tale of liquidating some remaining botanical assets of her father's in the colonies at a high price. Employ any legal means so that she believes this to be a stroke of good fortune, and not assistance from me." Sterling pondered for a moment and then nodded, a rare warm smile appearing on his aged face. "A very good notion, sir. My law firm has an affiliated branch in Boston. I can draw up records suggesting that a scientific library in America has purchased the copyright of Arthur Gray's unpublished research manuscripts at a high price, and that this money is being used to pay the London creditors directly. In this manner, Miss Gray's honor shall be preserved entirely. She will believe her father cleared his own debts through his intellectual legacy." "Very good," Benedict said, the tension on his face relaxing slightly. "Proceed at once. I want you to dispatch your most trustworthy clerks to London by the earliest carriage tomorrow morning. Locate all the promissory notes, pay them off, and destroy them. I want this completed within 2 weeks. I shall supervise this personally, Your Grace." Sterling rose, bowing to accept the order. "I will ensure no errors are made. Thank you, Sterling. The travel expenses and settlements shall be drawn from my personal account at Cootes Bank. Send the bills directly to me, I understand. If you will excuse me, sir, I shall prepare the necessary documents tonight in Kendal to ensure they are dispatched to London tomorrow." Benedict escorted Mr. Sterling politely to the door. When the heavy door closed once more, the quiet study returned to its customary silence. Benedict walked back slowly to the window. The fierce storm outside was still raging, but within his heart a monumental decision had been made. He had erected an invisible, unyielding wall of protection around Adeline Gray. Lady Catherine might hold the dirty secrets of Mayfair, but she would soon discover that the immense wealth and power of the Duke of Windermere were sufficient to crush her every low, malicious intrigue. From the grand hallway below, Adeline's piano music rose once again, gentle, soft, and warm, dispelling the chill of the stormy night in the Lake District. Benedict closed his eyes, listening to the peaceful melody, feeling a strange, unfamiliar tranquility seep into his soul. He knew he would do everything in his power to keep this music, preserve his daughter's smile, and shield the young woman with those gentle hands from all the tempests of life. Chapter 6. The Storm on the Hilltop. The storm descended upon the picturesque yet rugged landscape of the Lake District without a single word of warning, appearing for all the world like a colossal, primeval beast awakening from its long slumber in the deepest, darkest depths of the lake. The gloomy evening sky, already heavily laden with thick, suffocating gray clouds, rapidly collapsed onto the earth, swallowing the undulating green hills and jagged crags that surrounded the ancient estate of Windermere Manor. Bitter winds from the depths of the valley howled in a wild, shrieking frenzy, lashing mercilessly against the ancient pine trees that twisted and groaned in the wild darkness. Rain began to fall in earnest, not the persistent, gentle drizzle that was typical of a standard English spring, but a violent, drumming tempest that beat relentlessly and aggressively against the leaded glass windows of the antique mansion. Windermere Manor stood tall and defiant against the raging elements, resembling a solitary gray stone fortress, straining with all its might against the unrestrained fury of nature. Thunder rumbled continuously from the far-off horizon, deep, hollow, and profoundly threatening, causing even the thick, time-worn stone walls of the ancient mansion to vibrate slightly under its impact. Within the modest confines of her small bedchamber situated at the quiet corner of the east corridor, Adeline Gray slowly set down the leather-bound book she had been reading. The pale, fragile light from the single beeswax candle resting upon her writing table flickered and danced erratically, responding to the cold, damp drafts that seeped through the cracks and gaps of the old, weathered oak window frame. She shivered slightly in the chill of the evening, drawing her thin, worn wool cloak more closely around her slender, delicate shoulders. Adeline peered out into the darkness of the window, where a thick obscurity had swallowed the landscape, broken only occasionally when the dark heavens were violently torn apart by sharp, greenish bolts of lightning that slashed across the black sky. An uneasy premonition, cold and persistent, began to stir in the depths of her heart. Her thoughts turned immediately to young Mary. The child had always striven to appear resilient and silent before the cold world, yet Adeline knew that deep within that fragile, small soul lay the broken, jagged fragments of a trauma that had never truly healed. For a little girl who had witnessed her beloved mother perish so horribly in a carriage accident on a similarly tempestuous night, the thunderous roar outside was nothing short of the terrifying voice of death returning to claim what was left. Without warning, a blinding, brilliant flash of lightning, as bright and stark as midday sun, struck the rocky hilltop directly behind Windermere Manor. Immediately following the flash was a terrifying, deafening explosion of thunder, resounding with such violence that it felt as if the entire sky were collapsing directly upon the heavy slate roofs of the ancient mansion. The thunder burst forth with ear-splitting force, accompanied by the howling, shrieking wind and the sharp cracking of ancient branches in the garden below. Adeline started to her feet in alarm, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. At that exact moment, echoing from the bedchamber located at the far end of the long corridor, a heart-wrenching scream rang out. It was a cry of absolute, unadulterated terror, a sound completely unlike the normal weeping of an ordinary child, but rather the hopeless, desperate wail of a fragile soul being dragged down into the dark abyss of remembered pain. "Mary," Adeline whispered in alarm, her face instantly turning as pale as fine porcelain. She did not stop to think, nor did she even care to light a hand lamp to guide her way. She ran from her bedchamber, her bare feet gliding swiftly over the cold, smooth oak floorboards of the dark corridor. The chill wind blowing from the large corridor windows made the hem of her simple white cotton nightgown flutter and wave like a solitary moth in the dark. Each step of her frantic run was guided only by the intermittent, bluish flashes of lightning reflecting through the tall glass panes. As she drew nearer, Mary's desperate weeping and screaming grew louder and more frantic, choked with panic and tearing at the heart of anyone who had the misfortune to hear. The moment Adeline pushed open the door to Mary's bedchamber, she saw the young girl huddling in the furthest corner of the large bed, her small hands clutching her head as if to shield herself, her entire body shaking with violent tremors. Pillows and heavy blankets lay discarded and scattered upon the floorboards. Mary was screaming hysterically, hot tears streaming down her small face, which was already scratched from her own frantic fingers in her panic. Her blue eyes were glazed and unfocused, seeing nothing in the room, as if she were no longer in the safety of her bedchamber at all, but rather imprisoned once more in the memory of that terrifying, rain-swept night years ago. The night when the family carriage had overturned on the slick, muddy road, claiming her beloved mother's life before her very eyes. Each sudden flash of lightning caused her to shriek in agonizing pain as if the old, hidden wound were being clawed open anew by the elements. "Mary, my darling child, it is I," Adeline cried out, rushing to the bedside. Without a moment's hesitation, she knelt upon the mattress, wrapping her arms tightly and protectively around Mary's shaking, fragile form. Mary startled at the touch, struggling wildly like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage, but Adeline only held her closer and tighter. She used her own slender body to shield the child completely, blocking out the thundering, terrifying world outside. She pressed her cheek against Mary's soft golden hair, whispering gentle, soothing reassurances into her ear. "It is all right, my sweet Mary. I am here beside you. You are safe now. The storm shall pass. Windermere Manor is strong and secure. Nothing will happen to you. I promise I will not let anything in this world harm you." Yet as the very next thunderclap exploded directly overhead, Mary shrieked again in terror and covered her ears, her tiny body trembling with spasms of fear. Adeline understood at once that ordinary words of comfort could not pierce the barrier of the child's panicked mind. She took a deep, steadying breath, striving to calm the rapid beating of her own heart, and began to sing. It was an ancient traditional Scottish lullaby that her late father had sung to her in her youth, whenever she had feared the cold, dark winter nights in Bath. Adeline's voice rose, warm, clear, and filled with a deep maternal protection, echoing softly in the confines of the small room and rising above the howling wind and drumming rain outside. "The wind blows wild through the valley, the moon hides behind the cloud. Sleep, my beloved child. in these arms wrapped safe and proud. Though the dark night is deep, tomorrow the sun shall rise bright. Sleep, my beloved child, warm in this room tonight. Though the thunder may roar on the hills far away, these arms shall shield you, protecting you day by day. The slow, gentle, and rhythmic melody of the lullaby acted like a cool, refreshing stream, gradually soothing and putting out the fire of fear that had been consuming Mary's soul. The child's rapid, shallow breathing began to slow down and find a regular rhythm. Mary no longer struggled against the embrace. Instead, her tiny, trembling hands clung desperately to the soft fabric of Adeline's nightgown, as if it were the sole life-preserver in a vast and stormy sea. She buried her head deep against Adeline's warm, comforting chest, seeking that maternal protection she had been so cruelly deprived of for 2 long years since her mother's tragic death. Mary's hot, silent tears soaked through the thin fabric of Adeline's shoulder, but her crying gradually subsided, reducing to small, sorrowful, and quiet hiccups. The chamber door was suddenly pushed open in great haste. Benedict Howard, the Duke of Windermere, stood tall at the threshold, his chest heaving rapidly as he drew breath. His white linen shirt was slightly open at the collar, his dark hair disheveled by the wind and rain, and his usually stern face displayed an intense worry and tension. He had run all the way from the library on the ground floor upon hearing his daughter's terrified scream. In his hand, he held a single candle, its flickering, dancing flame illuminating the fear-filled eyes of a father who usually appeared unbreakable and cold as stone to the rest of the world. But as he stepped into the room, the scene that met his eyes made him freeze in his tracks. In the dim, shadows-filled light of the lightning and the flickering candle, he saw the governess, Adeline Gray, holding his daughter tightly in her embrace upon the bed. She paid no heed to the strict noble etiquette that governed their usual interactions, nor did she care that she wore only a simple, modest cotton nightdress. She held Mary close as if the child were her own flesh and blood, her slender back slightly curved to shield the little girl entirely from the elements in the room. And her gentle lullaby continued to rise, steady, sweet, and warm, despite the gale howling and beating outside the window. It was an incredibly beautiful, moving sight that caused the Duke's frozen, distant heart to skip a beat. It reawakened in him a warm, long-forgotten sense of family that he had believed buried forever under the cold ashes of his tragic past. Benedict quietly closed the heavy oak door behind him, placed the candle upon the small bedside table, and approached them. He did not stand over them as a distant, cold, and aloof master, but slowly knelt down upon the carpet beside the small bed, right next to Adeline. His voice when he finally spoke was husky and low, carrying a rare, unmistakable tremor of emotion. "Mary, how is she, Miss Gray?" Adeline looked up at him, her clear gray eyes shining in the dim candlelight but filled with an unwavering resolve. She shook her head slightly, gesturing for him to speak softly so as not to disturb the child. "Mary has suffered a severe panic, Your Grace." The sudden thunder reminded her of the accident, but she is gradually calming now under my care. "Please do not worry excessively, sir." Another peal of thunder cracked in the sky overhead, and though it was not as loud and violent as the previous ones, it still made Mary startle and whimper in Adeline's embrace. Instinctively, and without thinking of social propriety, Benedict reached out with his large, warm hand, placing it reassuringly upon Adeline's back while wrapping his strong arm around Mary. His broad, protective hand shielded both of the women, forming a solid, unbreakable barrier against the raging storm outside. This sudden, intimate physical contact startled Adeline slightly, yet she did not draw away from him. The intense warmth from his palm filtered through the thin cotton of her gown, bringing her a strange, comforting sense of security she had not felt since her beloved father's passing, when she had been left entirely alone to face the cruel tempests of life. The three of them sat close together upon the small bed, huddled in the narrow space warmed by their shared body heat. The heavy, rhythmic drumming of the rain upon the slate roof, and the wind whistling through the window, crevices formed a thick wall of sound, effectively separating them from the rest of the cold world. This unintended, sudden closeness dissolved all the rigid social barriers that existed between a noble, wealthy duke and a poor, destitute governess. In the midst of this terrifying storm, they were simply 2 human beings united in protecting a traumatized, fragile child. Benedict could perceive the faint, sweet scent of lavender and light powder arising from Adeline's hair, a pure, clean fragrance that was vastly different from the heavy, suffocating perfumes worn by the ladies of the London Ton. Time passed slowly, and the storm outside finally began to lose its wild fury, leaving only the steady, persistent patter of rain falling upon the slate tiles of the roof. Mary, completely exhausted from her panic and crying, fell into a deep sleep. her tiny delicate hand still held tightly to Adeline's finger, her head resting peacefully upon Adeline's shoulder. Mary's face was now serene, her breathing regular and soft. Benedict moved quietly, drawing the warm woolen blanket over his sleeping daughter, and said in a soft, low whisper, "Miss Grey, you may lean back and rest against the headboard. The night is still long, and you have exerted yourself greatly." "You must be tired," Adeline smiled gently at him, her voice as light and soft as a passing whisper. "I am perfectly fine, my lord. So long as Lady Mary sleeps well and peacefully, I would not mind staying awake all night to watch over her. Seeing her at peace like this brings a profound relief to my own heart." Benedict looked at his sleeping daughter, his gaze dropping with a deep, painful self-reproach. He spoke quietly, his voice carrying the heavy weight of a long-hidden pain. "With every great storm that rolls over these hills, I feel like the most powerless, useless man in the entire world. That night, the tragic night the carriage overturned in the Southern Valley, I could do absolutely nothing to save Charlotte. I tried with all my strength to pull her free from the wreckage, but the carriage was far too heavy, and everything happened too quickly. And I could not protect Mary from this terrible trauma. I have watched my daughter remain silent for 2 long years, screaming in terror whenever it rains, and I could only stand by and watch in absolute, agonizing helplessness." Adeline looked at the chiseled, a melancholic profile of his face, illuminated in the soft candlelight. The gentle gold light cast deep shadows over the Duke's high nose bridge and lean, hollow cheeks, highlighting his profound weariness and pain. She spoke gently, her voice carrying a deep, sincere empathy. "You are not God, Your Grace. You cannot govern the weather, nor can you prevent the sudden, tragic accidents of fate. But your constant presence here beside Mary whenever she needs you is the greatest protection and love a father can possibly offer. Mary is not silent because she is angry with you, sir. She has merely closed the doors of her soul to protect herself from memories that are too painful to bear. And our duty is to wait patiently and lovingly for her to open the door once more." Benedict turned to look at her, his dark gray gaze meeting hers in the quiet room. He perceived at once the deep, profound understanding in Adeline's eyes, a gentle yet resilient light he had never found in any other woman of his acquaintance. The ladies of London usually looked upon him with timidity, awe, or with cold calculation for his high title and vast fortune. Only she, this fallen, impoverished young lady, looked directly into his scarred soul with an unselfish, pure sincerity. "You always know how to find the most soothing and comforting words, Miss Grey," Benedict murmured in a low voice, a faint self-deprecating smile brushing his lips for a brief second. "Is that the rare talent of a scholar's daughter, or is it a patience forged from your own life's tempests?" Adeline lowered her long eyelashes, her fingers gently stroking Mary's soft golden curls. "Perhaps it is both, my lord. When my father passed away so suddenly and left behind such immense debts, I truly believed my world had collapsed entirely. The friends who once took tea with me in the salons of Mayfair turned away instantly. They looked at me as if I were a dangerous, contagious plague. I learned then that in the darkest times of life, the only thing keeping us from falling is patience with ourselves and a determined gentleness toward the world. I too wished to remain silent like Mary so as not to hear the cruel insults of society. But I soon realized that fleeing does not make the pain vanish. It only makes us far lonelier." Benedict listened in silence, his heart swelling with a deep, profound empathy and respect for the young woman before him. He recalled Lady Catherine tearing her letter of recommendation in Mayfair, and the proud, dignified way she had gathered each scrap without shedding a single tear before the mocking, hostile crowd of aristocrats. This girl, though battered so cruelly by life and stripped of all honor, status, and property, still maintained a noble, resilient, and beautiful soul filled with humanity and compassion. "They are blind, foolish, and shallow," Benedict said in a low, resonant voice, his gaze locking onto her face in the warm candlelight. "London society only judges a person's worth by their bank balances and the titles written on paper. They are not worthy of your concern or your thoughts, Miss Grey. To me, your presence here at Windermere is a great privilege for Mary and for—" He paused, in such sentence unfinished. Yet his dark eyes spoke all the deep emotion that a proud duke could not easily put into spoken words. Adeline blushed slightly under his intense gaze in the flickering candlelight. To break the heavy, intimate atmosphere that was warming between them, she smiled softly and asked, employing a touch of her characteristic Regency wit, "Your Grace, I trust you have no intention of docking my salary for this evening's overtime work? After all, caring for a young lady in the midst of a violent tempest was not included in our original agreement." Benedict let out a low, pleasant chuckle from his chest, a rare, warm sound in the room that had been silent and gloomy for 2 long years. On the contrary, Miss Grey, if it could purchase Mary's peace and a beautiful lullaby such as the one you sang, I fear all of the Windermere estate would not suffice to pay you. I must seriously consider doubling your annual compensation. You flatter me excessively, sir, Adeline replied, her grey eyes sparkling with a touch of intelligent playfulness. I am merely a poor humble governess, and I know well the limits of noble praise. It flies away as swiftly as a Lake District gale. Benedict did not respond with another light jest. Instead he stared silently at her gentle hands resting upon Mary's sleeping form. In the dim candlelight those hands appeared slender and delicate, bearing tiny scratches from past hardships, yet they possessed a wondrous magical power to soothe all wounds. He realized then that his feelings for her were no longer mere gratitude or simple sympathy. They had taken root deep in his heart, quiet and strong as the pine roots that clung to the stones of the Lake District mountains. Despite the howling gales, he wished to protect this brave girl, to shield her from life's cruel storms, just as she had shielded his daughter tonight. He realized he could not let her leave. He could no longer conceive of Windermere Manor without her gentle presence, her soft voice, and her warm piano music. They remained vigilant by Mary's bedside until the very first rays of dawn filtered through the heavy curtains, casting a soft pink and gold hue over the small room. The storm had fully retreated, leaving behind a clean, damp air and the absolute silence of the Lake District Valley. Mary stirred slightly in her sleep, her breathing regular and a faint, sweet smile gracing her lips, as if she were having a pleasant dream. Adeline and Benedict looked at one another, weary from the long vigil, yet in their eyes was a silent understanding and an invisible, unbreakable bond forged through the stormy night. Their love, quiet yet intense, had begun to sprout from the shared pain of the darkness, prepared to face whatever trials lay ahead in the coming days. Chapter 7. The resilient shield. The heavy, ominous sound of carriage wheels, grinding heavily and noisily upon the muddy, rain-drenched track leading toward the grand Windermere estate, tore violently through the quietude of the late autumn afternoon. The English countryside sky, grey and desolate, fell rapidly upon the hills, heavily shrouded in dark, weeping clouds that carried a freezing, relentless drizzle typical of the closing days of autumn. Inside the luxurious velvet-lined carriage bearing the ancient Howard family crest, Lady Catherine Howard sat perfectly erect, her haughty, sharp features partially concealed behind the thin black lace veil of an expensive, fashionable velvet bonnet. Her gaze, cold, calculating, and sharp as twin steel blades, was fixed unblinkingly upon the middle-aged man in the black cassock sitting directly opposite her. This was Curate Thomas, the newly appointed curate of the local parish. He was a man who went to great lengths to maintain a respectable, pious appearance, yet behind his narrow, downcast eyes lay an insatiable, deep-seated greed, and the typical cowardly ambition of one who wished to advance his station within the church at any cost. Curate Thomas, Lady Catherine spoke at last, her voice low, measured, and cold, yet carrying a distinct, sharp undertone of threat that could not be mistaken by any ears. The sudden lability of this northern weather and these lassed, muddy roads have cost us far too much precious time today. I trust you have carefully, thoroughly, and meticulously examined every detail of the terms of the Howard family entail. I shall permit absolutely no errors or oversights when this plan of ours commences at the manor. Curate Thomas leaned forward slightly in his seat, his plump, sweaty hands clutching the leather bag, containing the vital legal documents tightly to his chest, as if his life depended upon it. He cleared his throat nervously, attempting to regain his confidence and professional composure, before replying to the powerful noblewoman. Lady Catherine, I assure you I have thoroughly and exhaustively researched the parish archives, and the Howard family succession laws dating back to the late Regency era. The entail is quite explicit and leaves no room for any legal doubt. If Benedict has no legitimate male heir, the entirety of the Windermere estate and the Howard dukedom shall pass to the nearest male heir in the line. In this instance, that is your son, Henry, and what of Mary? Lady Catherine curled her thin lips, her handsome, powdered face twisting into a cold smile carrying supreme, unadulterated malice. His will silent, eccentric, and useless daughter. That is the very crux and legal foundation of this entire matter. Curate Thomas nodded eagerly, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, quiet whisper that could not be heard outside the carriage. If the child is declared legally insane and lacking mental capacity, she will be stripped of all direct inheritance rights and must be placed in a private asylum for long-term, isolated medical treatment. In that event, Duke Benedict will have no direct heir capable of managing the estate. Should he pass without a son, Or if we can prove he lacks the psychological capacity to manage the estate due to excessive grief over his daughter's condition, your Henry shall immediately inherit the title and fortune. Benedict is currently away from home, Catherine said coldly, looking out the carriage window where the old, gnarled oak trees of the Windermere estate receded into the thick gray mist. He departed early for a neighboring village to resolve a land dispute with his tenants. It is a journey of at least 5 hours. This is our sole perfect opportunity to conduct a surprise mental examination of the child. Once the certificate of insanity is signed and sealed by the local church under your witness, Benedict will be unable to reverse the situation. Curate Thomas shivered slightly at the cold, calculating cruelty of the woman sitting before him, but the prospect of a wealthier, more prestigious London parish, promised by Catherine's influential family, quickly extinguished his remaining conscience. I have prepared the mental evaluation documents. Once I certify that the child displays symptoms of madness, agitation, and danger to herself, we can transport her immediately to a private asylum in the suburbs. The carriage came to a sudden, jarring halt before the grand stone portico of Windermere Manor. Lady Catherine stepped down, the hem of her dark green silk gown sweeping over the damp, dew-laden grass. She did not bother to wait for a footman to open the door, pushing open the heavy oak entrance herself, and stepping inside with the air of a true mistress. Curate Thomas followed hastily behind, clutching the leather bag against his chest as if it were his lifeline. Harrison, the loyal gray-haired butler of Windermere, immediately stepped forward to intercept them in the grand foyer with a worried, anxious expression on his face. Lady Catherine, my lady, Duke Benedict is not present at the manor. He gave strict instructions that no visitors were to be received during this time. Out of my way, Harrison, Catherine snapped, her sharp, cutting voice instantly interrupting the old butler. I have not come to be Benedict's guest. I have come to perform my duty to protect the Howard bloodline from taint and madness. Curate Thomas and I have urgent business concerning Mary. Stand aside for the work of the church. Without waiting for Harrison to react or summon more servants, Lady Catherine strode quickly and purposefully toward the grand mahogany staircase, heading straight for Mary's schoolroom on the second floor. Harrison tried desperately to signal other servants to send word to the Duke, but Catherine's aggressive, authoritative presence alongside the curate representing the local church intimidated the junior staff. None dared intervene directly to stop an aristocrat. In the warm schoolroom heated by the crackling hearth fire, Mary sat at a small wooden table, intently painting lavender flowers onto a rough sheet of paper. Adeline stood beside her, gently guiding the child on how to mix the colors to create depth and shadow. That peaceful space was suddenly shattered as the schoolroom door was thrown open, slamming against the wall with a loud bang. Mary startled violently, the paintbrush slipping from her hand and staining her unfinished watercolor sketch. She shrank back immediately, trembling against Adeline's side with eyes wide with terror. Lady Catherine entered the room, her eyes sweeping over the space with utter disdain before landing on Adeline and Mary. Curate Thomas followed, his face pale with tension yet striving to appear solemn and authoritative beneath his black clerical cassock. What a cozy domestic scene, Catherine sneered, approaching the child's desk. A poor destitute governess from the London slums and a mad child playing with cheap paints. Benedict has truly turned Windermere into an almshouse for failures. Adeline quickly wrapped her arms around Mary, feeling the child's severe shaking beneath her thin wool gown. She stood tall and straight, facing Lady Catherine with a steady, unflinching gaze, without a hint of fear or hesitation before the noblewoman. Lady Catherine, this is Lady Mary's private schoolroom. By order of Duke Benedict, no one is permitted entry without his consent or mine. I request that you and the curate depart immediately. Lady Catherine laughed aloud, a harsh, malicious sound that filled the quiet schoolroom. She turned to Curate Thomas. Do you see, Curate? Even the hireling here is arrogant to the point of madness. Who does she think she is? A creature without a single guinea to her name, living on Benedict's charity, yet she dares lecture me? A low-born wretch dares style herself a defender of the House of Howard. She took another step forward, pointing a black, lace-gloved finger at Mary. Hand the child over. Curate Thomas possesses a formal mental evaluation order from the local diocese. This child is a danger to the Howard family and the community. Her madness has been concealed within these walls for far too long. She must be taken to a more suitable place, an asylum for the insane. Mary, hearing the word asylum, let out a small terrified cry. She sobbed, her arms wrapping tightly around Adeline's waist, burying her face in the fabric of her gown to hide from the frightening world outside. Adeline felt a fire of anger burn in her chest, but she knew she must maintain absolute composure and sharp wit. A single misstep in her conduct or speech could serve as a pretext for them to take coercive action. She stepped forward, standing fully before the classroom door and Mary, transforming her body into a solid shield between the girl and the two malicious intruders. "An asylum, Lady Catherine?" Adeline spoke, her voice cold, clear, and highly articulate, echoing through the schoolroom. "You speak of Lady Mary Howard, the sole legitimate daughter of Duke Benedict. Under current English law, no local parish curate has the authority to issue a mental evaluation or commitment order against a member of the nobility without the witness and signatures of at least 2 licensed royal physicians, alongside the written approval of the High Court. The document the curate holds in his hand is merely a diocesan notice of behavioral survey, carrying absolutely no legal force to execute any coercive action against Lady Mary." Curate Thomas paled slightly, astonished by the young governess's sharp legal knowledge and confident demeanor. He looked at Catherine with concern, his hands holding the folder beginning to tremble. Lady Catherine's sharp features hardened into a mask of pure rage, furious to her very core that her carefully crafted scheme had been so easily and publicly exposed before her ecclesiastical subordinate. She shrieked in an octave unbecoming of her rank, completely forgetting her practiced noble poise. "Silence, you insolent base governess. You've absolutely no right to speak or breathe in my presence. Your impoverished birth, bankrupt family, and low social standing are already a dark stain upon Windermere Manor, and now you dare to interfere in the internal, sacred affairs of the noble Howard family. Curate Thomas, do your duty immediately." "Take the child at once." Curate Thomas stepped forward highly hesitantly and nervously, extending his plump, trembling hands with the intention of physically brushing Adeline aside to lay hold of little Mary. "Hold," Adeline commanded, her voice filled with an unyielding authority and icy severity that froze the curate instantly in his tracks. She looked directly and piercingly into Curate Thomas's narrow eyes with utter contempt and defiance. "Mr. Thomas, I warn you now as the legally responsible party in this room. If you dare take another step forward and touch Lady Mary, you shall face immediate charges of unlawful trespass, the kidnapping of a noble minor, and a severe, unforgivable offense against the honor of the Duke of Windermere. Duke Benedict is by no means a man to overlook threats to his beloved daughter. Are you entirely certain that Lady Catherine will protect you when you are stripped of your holy gown, ruined socially, and brought before the Royal Court of Justice in London? Or will she simply abandon you to protect her own reputation?" Curate Thomas immediately stepped back in terror, a cold sweat breaking out on his pale brow. Adeline's sharp words had struck his greatest and most vulnerable fear: the complete ruin of his clerical career, the total loss of his standing in the church, and the prospect of facing royal justice in a court of law. He knew all too well the cold, ruthless temperament and the fearsome, far-reaching power of Duke Benedict when his family was provoked. You dare to use the law to threaten a holy man of the cloth." Lady Catherine was so thoroughly enraged that her face flushed red beneath her thin, black lace veil. She stepped forward with heavy steps, fully intending to force her way past Adeline and pull Mary out by her arm. "I am a member of the House of Howard. I have far more right to determine this child's fate than any cheap, bankrupt servant. You bear the name Howard, Lady Catherine, but you are by no means the master of Windermere," Adeline countered, her words sharp as cold steel and heavy with truth, utterly crushing her opponent's arrogance. "The sole master of this estate is Duke Benedict, and until his return, I am the one who has been entrusted by him with the sole care and protection of Lady Mary. Any coercive or offensive act occurring in this classroom without my consent shall be deemed a direct, personal assault upon the Duke's authority. I strongly advise you to weigh the consequences carefully before Benedict returns to this manor." Adeline stood with her spine perfectly straight, her slender shoulders holding firm before the classroom door. Her gray gaze was cold, locked onto Catherine's face without the slightest sign of yielding. She knew all too well that she was playing an exceedingly dangerous game in confronting Lady Catherine directly, but she would rather endure their utmost wrath or future revenge than allow poor Mary to be dragged away to a dark asylum. Lady Catherine glared at Adeline with pure hatred, recognizing the unyielding determination and the sharp, flawless reasoning of the poor governess. A tense, heavy silence fell over the classroom, broken only by the crackle of dry firewood in the hearth, and Catherine's furious, heavy breathing. She knew in her heart that if she proceeded with physical force, without legal documents signed by the Duke or a royal court, she would place herself at a severe disadvantage before the law upon Benedict's return. You shall regret this insolence, Adeline, Lady Catherine hissed in a low voice, her tone filled with deep hatred and malice. When Benedict realizes you are but a traitor attempting to manipulate his mad daughter for your own financial gain, he will cast you out of Windermere without a single copper. Just you wait, the end of you and this mad child is not far off. Lady Catherine spun around violently, striding out of the schoolroom, the hem of her green gown brushing sharply against the wooden door as a final venting of her anger. Curate Thomas hurried after her in haste, clutching the leather folder, not daring to look back at Adeline even once. Their heavy footsteps receded and disappeared down to the ground floor, followed by the dry, heavy slam of the main entrance door, and the hurried rolling of carriage wheels departing the grounds of Windermere Manor in the pouring rain. Only now did Adeline truly breathe a long sigh of relief. Her legs trembled slightly from the extreme tension she had just endured. She turned, kneeling down to Mary's eye level, and wrapped the child in a tight protective embrace. Mary was still sobbing, her small shoulders shaking incessantly from the terror. "It is all right, my darling Mary," Adeline whispered, stroking the girl's soft curls with warm hands. "They have gone, I am here, no one can take you away, I promise you." Mary clung tightly to Adeline's neck, seeking safety and comfort in the warm embrace of the only governess who believed in her. Adeline looked out the window. The sky outside had fallen completely dark, raindrops beating against the glass in a chaotic, wild rhythm. She knew in her heart that this was merely the opening shot of a fierce, desperate battle to come. Lady Catherine would not abandon her scheme to seize the Howard inheritance so easily, and Adeline would have to prepare herself to confront whatever dark plots lay ahead, to protect the poor child and the honor of Windermere. Chapter 8. The Evaluation in the Rose Garden. The torrential, relentless rain characteristic of the mountainous lake district beat aggressively and continuously against the high, arched windows of Windermere Manor, creating an endless rhythmic rustle that echoed throughout the vast, cold stone corridors. Inside the family's private quarters, Benedict Howard had just returned from his hurried, desperate ride in the storm. His dark wool riding cloak was heavy with water and spattered with mud from the rugged mountain paths of Westmoreland, and his ash-gray eyes burned with a cold, absolute resolve. He stepped into the warm schoolroom where the massive stone fireplace crackled softly, casting a gentle, welcoming warmth that chased away the damp autumn chill of northern England. There, Adeline Gray sat beside little Lady Mary under the warm candlelight, using her gentle hands to guide the little girl as she sketched soft purple lavender stalks on a rough scrap of paper. The peaceful scene stood in stark contrast to the howling gale outside. Benedict tapped his fingers lightly against the mahogany table, his voice low, solemn, and carrying an edge of cold anger. "Adeline, Catherine has grown more desperate and ruthless than we anticipated. She is no longer willing to wait for the next London season. During my ride to Kendal, I received word from a trusted source. Catherine has officially convinced Magistrate Higgins of the county, and has invited Dr. Warren, a renowned mental specialist from London, to Windermere to conduct a formal assessment of Mary's sanity. Catherine intends to use Mary's 2-year silence as absolute proof of her mental incompetence. If Magistrate Higgins signs the assessment order, the family entail will immediately be triggered, and the inheritance of Windermere will be transferred entirely to her son, Richard." He clenched his fists, his chiseled face showing the deep youth and anxiety of a father helpless before the loopholes of the law. She has gathered reports from the previous dismissed governesses, who fabricated stories of Mary screaming and destroying furniture to prove she is a danger. Higgins, despite his respect for the Howard family, cannot ignore a formal petition signed by a family member and Curate Thomas. This legal evaluation is unavoidable, and if I refuse it, it will look as though I am hiding a mad child to protect my own position. Adeline raised her head, her gaze calm and unwavering, reflecting the intellect and dignity of a scholar's daughter. She rose quietly and placed her gentle hand on Benedict's trembling shoulder, offering him a silent source of warmth and absolute trust. "Your Grace, we have no need to flee or hide, Lady Mary," Adeline said, her voice soft yet firm, every word carrying a steady conviction. "Fleeing now will only convince the local gentry of Catherine's malicious rumors. Let them conduct the evaluation, but we shall not do so in the cold drawing rooms of this manor. Let us hold the assessment in the Rose Garden, behind the estate tomorrow afternoon, where Mary feels most free, peaceful, and close to nature. My gentle hands and the scent of lavender will be her shield against their provocation. I have spent weeks teaching her, and I know she is ready." Benedict looked into Adeline's clear blue eyes, feeling the warmth and resilience emanating from her gentle touch. The you-what and coldness that had frozen the solitary Duke's heart for 2 years seemed to melt entirely under her gentleness. He stepped closer, gently lifting her slender hand, and pressed a soft kiss against her knuckles. "Thank you, Adeline. Your gentle hands are the greatest blessing that has ever come to Windermere. I shall leave the choice of location to you, and I will be there to protect you both." Throughout the following day, Adeline devoted all her time and heart to preparing Mary. She led the little girl to the rose garden, where the late autumn lavender bushes swayed in the breeze, releasing a clean, sweet fragrance into the Lake District air. Under the clear blue sky, Adeline knelt on the soft grass, taking Mary's small hands into her own. She pressed her thumb gently against the child's palm 3 times. She explained softly, her voice as soothing as the evening melody. "Look at me, my darling Mary. Whenever I press your hand 3 times like this with my gentle hands, it means I am here. You are completely safe. And when you feel ready to speak to them, hold my finger tightly once. That shall be the secret signal of our hands, a quiet covenant between us that no one can interfere with. You do not need to fear the strange faces." Adeline also patiently guided Mary to control her breathing when facing fear. She taught Mary the short poem about lavender, advising the girl to repeat it in her mind whenever the noise around her grew too loud, or when strange faces made her panic. Adeline read rhythmically, "Lavender blue, lavender green, softest purple you have seen. Hold my hand and do not fear, sweetest scent is drawing near." While Adeline was preparing Mary in the rose garden, Benedict was making his own legal preparations in his study. He had summoned his solicitor, Phillips, from Kendal. On the massive mahogany desk, the legal documents lay illuminated under the warm glow of beeswax candles. Phillips adjusted his spectacles, looking at Benedict in utter astonishment. "Your Grace, are you entirely certain about the clauses in this marriage settlement? You are granting Miss Grey an exceptionally large independent annual annuity of £1,000, along with the permanent use of the Sussex estate. This is on par with the daughters of the highest peers in the realm." "I am entirely certain, Phillips," Benedict replied, his tone cold and unyielding. "Adeline's gentle hands have restored life to Mary and brought warmth back to Windermere. She deserves my absolute respect and protection. This settlement shall be her shield against Catherine's schemes and the disdain of the Mayfair gentry. If they attempt to attack her background or Arthur Grey's debts, they will find her backed by the full wealth and legal power of the Windermere title." Benedict picked up his goosequill pen, decisively signing his name beneath the marriage settlement, and pressed the red wax seal of the House of Howard onto the document. He knew that with this deed, Adeline would enter society as his future duchess with an unassailable standing, fully protected from any malice Catherine might unleash. Gentle hands and the voice of salvation. The following afternoon, the sky over the Lake District welcomed a rare, pale golden sunshine that filtered down through the branches of the rose garden behind Windermere Manor. Inside the stone pavilion, surrounded by blooming purple lavender, the formal assessment began under the watchful eyes of Duke Benedict, Magistrate Higgins, and Dr. Warren from London. Lady Catherine stood nearby, her sharp, cold eyes fixed maliciously on Mary, confident that this day would see her son Richard's inheritance secured. Dr. Warren, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a kind countenance, sat opposite Mary. He did not employ the harsh, interrogative tone of Curate Thomas, but instead asked gently, "Lady Mary, can you show me which flower in this garden is your favorite? And do you know the name of this beautiful place where we are sitting?" Mary sat on the stone bench, her small shoulders tensing in fear before the strangers. But Adeline stood right beside her. Beneath her gray muslin gown, Adeline's gentle hand held Mary's small hand, her thumb pressing gently 3 times. "I am here, you are safe." Mary took a deep breath, the scent of the dried lavender sachet in Adeline's pocket drifting around her. The little girl slowly pointed toward the purple lavender bushes, her breathing remaining steady. Seeing Mary remain calm and the evaluation proceeding so smoothly, Lady Catherine grew desperate. She knew that if Mary passed this test, all hopes of her son Richard inheriting the estate would vanish. Her face twisted with envy and desperation. She quietly stepped back toward the edge of the pavilion, near the heavy wrought iron plant stand holding a massive bronze urn filled with decorative autumn branches. With a deliberate shove disguised as an accident, Catherine struck the stand, sending the heavy wrought iron structure and the bronze urn crashing violently down onto the stone pavement. A deafening, harsh clang of metal colliding with stone echoed violently through the quiet garden, shattering the peace of the afternoon. The sudden loud crash immediately triggered Mary's traumatic memory of the carriage accident, where the metal frame had broken with a similar terrifying clang, claiming her mother's life. Mary let out a terrified shriek, Her eyes dilated in panic, her breathing grew shallow, and she clutched her head, trembling violently. The child fell into a severe panic attack, sobbing hysterically and trying to crawl under the stone bench to hide from the noise. Catherine immediately stepped forward, pointing triumphantly. "Look, magistrate. Look, doctor, you see it now. This child is completely insane. She loses her mind and screams at a mere noise. She cannot inherit the House of Howard. Sign the order to send her to the London asylum immediately." In the midst of the chaos, Adeline did not waste a single second arguing with Catherine. She knelt down instantly on the damp grass beside Mary. Her gentle hands vun placing firmly over Mary's ears, shielding the child from Catherine's screeching accusations and the ringing echoes of the crash. "Mary, look at me," Adeline whispered, her voice as soothing and warm as a spring stream. She took out the dried lavender sachet, using her gentle hands to crush the purple buds, holding them near Mary's face. The sweet, calming scent of lavender immediately enveloped the little girl. Adeline gently rubbed Mary's back and chest, repeating the poem in a soft, steady cadence. "Lavender blue, lavender green, softest purple you have seen. Hold my hand and do not fear, sweetest scent is drawing near." Adeline's gentle hands caressed Mary's cheeks, conveying warmth and unconditional love. Slowly, Mary's breathing began to steady, her cries subsided and her deep blue eyes opened, looking into Adeline's reassuring gaze. Before the astonished eyes of everyone present, Mary reached out her small hands and tightly clasped Adeline's fingers, responding to their secret touch signal. She looked directly at Dr. Warren and Magistrate Higgins, speaking in a clear, sweet, and steady voice. "Adeline is here. Mary is not afraid anymore. Mary is not mad. Mary wants to stay at Windermere with Father and Adeline." The entire garden fell into a stunned silence. Magistrate Higgins stood frozen, his monocle slipping from his eye. Dr. Warren stood up, his eyes shining with deep emotion. He turned to Higgins and declared firmly, "Magistrate, Lady Mary is entirely sane. She merely suffers from trauma, and this remarkable breakthrough is the direct result of Miss Grey's patient care and her gentle hands. Furthermore, the loud crash just now was clearly a deliberate provocation by Lady Catherine to trigger a panic. I declare there is no medical ground whatsoever to commit this child." Magistrate Higgins' face darkened as he stared sternly at Catherine. "Lady Catherine, your actions are an insult to the law and to noble decency. I shall sign no such order. A full report of this malicious provocation and attempted manipulation of a minor shall be sent to the High Court in London." Benedict Howard stepped forward, his tall frame shielding Adeline and Mary under the afternoon sun. His ash-gray eyes stared coldly at Catherine, who collapsed onto a chair in despair. Benedict spoke, his voice deep, authoritative, and echoing through the garden. "Lady Mary has no need to prove her sanity to anyone, nor does Miss Grey need to justify her presence in Windermere. For from this day forward, her authority is my authority. Adeline Grey is the future Duchess of Windermere, and any insult to her is an insult to the House of Howard." He paused, translating his declaration into Vietnamese to ensure Catherine's domestic accomplices understood. "Con gai toi, Lady Mary, không có nghĩa vụ phải chứng minh sự tỉnh táo của mình với bất kỳ ai. Và cô Grey cũng không cần phải giải thích cho sự hiện diện của nàng tại Windermere. Bởi vì từ ngày hôm nay trở đi, quyền lực của nàng chính là quyền lực của tôi. Adeline Grey là phu nhân không được tương lai của Windermere, và bất kỳ sự sỉ nhục nào nhắm vào nàng cũng chính là sự sỉ nhục trực tiếp đối với gia tộc Howard. Đôi bàn tay dịu dàng của nàng đã cứu rỗi con gái tôi, và nàng là nữ chủ nhân duy nhất của điển trang này." Benedict turned to Harrison. "Harrison, show Lady Catherine out. Prepare the carriage to convey her from Windermere before tomorrow noon. She is barred from entering any Howard estate." Catherine covered her face in shame, fleeing the garden under the watchful guard of the house servants. Justice had triumphed, and Adeline's gentle hands had conquered the cruelty of greed. Chapter 10: The Lavender Blooms. The following morning, the skies over Westmoreland bore the cold, gray tint of late autumn, reflecting the tense atmosphere inside the Duke of Windermere's study. On the mahogany desk, the legal documents lay in silence. Lady Catherine stood by the window, her hand in a black lace glove gripping the cold stone sill. Her face, usually covered in thick powder to hide her age and extreme pride, was now as pale as wax. Her sharp eyes were fixed on Benedict, who stood tall and cold by the desk, with Adeline beside him, the woman she had dismissed as a commoner unworthy of notice. Benedict did not look up. He turned a page, the rustle of paper sharp in the quiet room. Cutting off her last hope, he tapped his finger on the transfer document. A servant caught stealing silver would receive more leniency. "Lady Catherine," Benedict spoke, his voice low and freezing. They are merely dismissed you, however, sought to ruin Adeline, poison Mary with lies, and steal Windermere. My leniency for family blood ended the moment you deliberately provoked Mary's panic in the rose garden. I only did what was best for the family. Catherine shrieked, glaring at Adeline. Are you going to throw this entire estate to a woman from the mud of London society? A governess with nothing to her name. Adeline stepped forward. She was no longer the timid girl who trembled under the gaze of the Lake District gentry. Her gaze was calm, her spine straight, her shoulders carrying the natural dignity of one who had found strength in kindness, and her gentle hands. Birth does not define the nobility of a soul, Lady Catherine, Adeline said, her voice soft but clear. But greed and cruelty will drag any noble name into the mud. Richard is a young man of talent, but he has been ruined by the illusion of inheritance you fed him. It is better for him to stand on his own feet and work, rather than wait for a dead man's shoes. Silence, commoner. Catherine lost control, stepping forward to strike, but Benedict was faster. He stood up, shielding Adeline, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light that made Catherine halt. Enough, Benedict growled. It ends here. The transfer of the small estate in southern Cornwall is signed. You shall depart immediately. Your allowance from the Windermere Trust is cut. You shall have only a minimal stipend to maintain the life of a Goa-foo, without servants and without standing in London. And most importantly, if you or Richard come within 50 miles of Westmoreland, I shall activate the prosecution against Richard for his fraud with the trust funds last year. I believe you do not wish to see your son in the dock. Lady Catherine staggered back, ruined, her wealth, her power, her son's future, all gone because of Adeline's arrival and Benedict's cold resolve. You shall regret this, Benedict, she whispered, her voice cracked. Society will never accept her. They will laugh at Windermere. What they do is no longer your concern. Benedict said coldly. He turned to the door. Harrison Teencrike, the carriage is ready. As the door closed behind Catherine, a long silence fell. Benedict let out a long breath, releasing the burden of decades. He turned, taking Adeline's hands, pressing them to his face. Were you afraid? He asked, his eyes filled with love and concern. Adeline smiled, her fingers brushing his cheek. With you I have never known fear, Benedict. My gentle hands have found their safest shelter. 3 weeks later, the sky over Westmoreland was clear, dressed in the bright blue of a Lake District autumn. The late lavender around St. Jude's stone church swayed in the wind, filling the air with a clean, sweet fragrance. Today was the wedding of the Duke of Windermere. The wedding of Benedict and Adeline was warm and solemn. Jude was decorated with thousands of purple lavender stalks and white roses, forming a fragrant path to the altar. The pews were filled with the local gentry. These people who weeks ago whispered about Adeline's poverty now sat in respectful silence. As the organ began to play, the doors opened and Adeline appeared. She wore a simple, elegant wedding gown of ivory silk. Around her neck was the emerald necklace of the Windermere house, which Benedict had placed on her. Her hair was swept high, adorned with a small lavender sprig and a veil. Beside her walked Mary, radiant in a white dress, holding a basket of lavender. Every step Adeline took on the lavender-strewn aisle drew admiring looks. The gentry bowed as she passed Mrs. Gable, who had led the gossip, bowed low in respect. They realized Adeline did not need a grand lineage to look noble. Her dignity and the grace of her gentle hands made her a true Duchess of Windermere. Benedict stood at the altar, his eyes fixed on Adeline. His heart beat fast, filled with emotion. He had thought he would live in cold solitude, but Adeline had brought light in her gentle hands to save his soul. As she reached his side, Benedict reached out to take her hand. Their hands clasped tightly before the vicar. Before God and these witnesses, the vicar spoke. I pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined, let no man tear asunder. Benedict lifted her veil, he looked into her clear eyes. Seeing her love, he pressed a firm kiss on her lips, swearing to protect her for life. As they turned to face the guests, the church erupted in applause. The bells rang out across the valleys. The congratulations of the gentry were now sincere. They knew Windermere had a new duchess respected by all. That afternoon, Windermere lay in the golden sunlight of late autumn. The sun lit up the ancient stone walls, turning the windows into mirrors. The breeze from the lake carried the scent of pine. Behind the manor, the lavender fields stretched to the hills, a sea of purple under the golden sky. This was Adeline's favorite place, where Benedict led her for their first hours as husband and wife. Benedict had shed his formal coat, wearing only his white shirt and waistcoat. He held Adeline's hand as they walked. Adeline lifted her train, her hair blowing in the wind, her face filled with peace. I still feel as if I am dreaming, Adeline, Benedict whispered, holding her hand. A sweet dream after years of darkness, Adeline stopped, turning to him. If it is a dream, it is one we built together with patience and love, Benedict. It is real, and it is ours. From afar, Mary's laughter rang out. She ran through the lavender, her white dress fluttering. She was healthy and happy, her eyes shining. Father! Adeline, Mary called, then paused. She looked at Adeline, then at her father, her small face hesitant, then filled with determination. She ran faster through the tall lavender, throwing herself into Adeline's open arms. Adeline knelt in the flowers, wrapping her arms around her. Mary hugged Adeline's neck, whispering clearly, "Mother." The word was spoken, sweet and sacred like a miracle. Adeline froze, then tears of joy ran down her cheeks. She held Mary close, feeling the warmth of the child she loved as her own. "I am here, Mary. Mother is here," Adeline sobbed, kissing her hair. Benedict watched them, his chest tight with emotion. He saw the woman he loved holding his child. Hearing the word mother, he thought Mary would never say again. A warm tear rolled down the Duke's cheek, washing away the coldness and loneliness of the past. Benedict knelt beside them, wrapping his strong arms around them both. The lavender fields surrounded them, like a warm embrace under the golden sunset. "Thank you, Adeline," Benedict whispered, his voice shaking. "Thank you for bringing a real family back to Windermere with your gentle hands." Adeline looked up through her tears, her smile bright. "We are a family, Benedict, now and forever, under the windswept sky of Westmoreland. In the middle of the purple lavender fields, 3 silhouettes became one under the warm sunset. The storms had passed, and the darkness was gone. Only love, peace, and a bright future lay ahead at Windermere Manor, where happiness had finally returned.